Chapter 613. Time continued to pass. The two officials of the department for purging officials in the carriage grew even paler. Without further delay, they left 100 Flowers Lane. The starlight shone on Zhou Prison, on the crabapple tree, and on Zhou Tong's crimson official's gown. It was like hell, like a fairyland, like a sea of blood. As he listened to his subordinate's report, his face showed no change of expression, just like a dead man. The Orthodox Academy had the sword array of South Stream Temple inside and the Orthodoxy cavalry outside. The Li Palace seemed to have done nothing, but in reality they had long since made preparations. Mao Chiu had been in that inn in 100 Flowers Lane the entire time, his sleeves untainted by the wind, but he had a divine artifact on him. There were still 18 cardinals in the Orthodox Academy, and in the darkness there were still a few experts that Mei Lisha had left behind. Zhou Tong had used the lives of 10-some elite assassins to confirm these facts. With this sort of force, even if the Divine Empress truly mobilized the Imperial Guard, she still might not be able to kill Qin Chongsheng unless she personally moved, and it had to be done in the shortest amount of time. Otherwise, the Pope would assuredly appear. He had never expected to be able to kill Qin Chongsheng tonight. He had only probed and concluded that it was no good. He had to find another method. In a certain manner on the outskirts of the capital, a few people were also discussing the same matter. This won't do. It's too difficult to break into the Orthodox Academy without drawing attention. The clan has spent so much money in these past few years. Has it all been fed to dogs? If it were anything else, it would probably be possible, but this is no small matter. You first have to tell me just how many people we have in the Orthodox Academy. We truly do have spies in the Orthodox Academy, and we also have spies in the Orthodoxy cavalry. We can even find friends in the Li Palace who are willing to help us. But Su Yu Rong's response was simple, but extremely effective. As long as the sword array of South Stream Temple exists, we have no way of approaching the house. I don't believe that the sword array formed by those girls can stop us. Seeing the excited expression on his nephew's face, Tianhai Qinwu slightly creased his brow. He raised his right hand to stop the argument in the hall and asked, "Are you surnamed Zhou, Wang, or Su?" Zhou was Zhou Dufu, Wang was Wang Jitsa, and Su was Su Li. In the past 1,000 years, only these three people had charged into Holy Maiden Peak and broken through the sword array of South Stream Temple. Yet even they had spent a very long time and expended a great deal of effort. Who in the Tianhai clan could compare to these three legendary figures? And who had the confidence to break through South Stream Temple's sword array before the Pope's divine manifestation, enter the house and kill Qin Chongsheng? Hearing this, the nephew was speechless. His face turned red and he lowered his head. Tianhai Qinwu glanced at his son, who had remained silent all this time, then said indifferently to his clansmen, "The saintess is wise and her skill in deduction is unparalleled. How could there be any loopholes? The Orthodoxy will naturally protect Qin Chongsheng." The Holy Maiden thought that with her willingness to protect Qin Chongsheng, the Divine Empress would perhaps be somewhat fearful and would not personally act. So Qin Chongsheng would be safe. But she forgot one thing, and that is, Qin Chongsheng is not a dead person. Zhou Tong expressionlessly looked at his subordinates and said, "Since he's not a dead person, he assuredly has his own thoughts. If he himself wants to leave the Orthodox Academy, who can stop him?" The subordinates did not understand and asked, "Why did he come out?" Zhou Tong stood in front of the courtyard and looked at the crabapple tree, not saying anything. He had seen the message between the pavilion of heavenly secrets and the imperial palace. In the message, the elder of heavenly secrets had said that Qin Chongsheng was about to die. He knew that people like Qin Chongsheng would definitely not die quietly like this. The wine cup fell on the hard pear-wood table, giving off a dull and somewhat clear sound. Tian Haixingxue, who had just returned to the capital from Snowhold Pass, raised his head and jeered at his clansmen in the hall. Finally, his gaze fell on his father, and he said, "We can only wait for him to walk out of the Orthodox Academy himself." Tianhai Chinwu's expression softened, somewhat gratified, but in the next moment the gratification vanished with the wind. His expression became solemn once more, and his voice became cold. "He will come out. As long as he takes one step out of the Orthodox Academy, kill him." The night was just as peaceful as before, as peaceful as ever. It was like those fallen figures were just an illusion, like there had not been many terrifying assassins that had come and then been killed one by one. Zheshio calmly gazed at the lakeshore, confirming that the assassins were all dead. However, his mood did not relax. He was still rather worried. He slid down from the banyan tree and walked towards the house. Countless sword intents remained hidden, secretly following the laws of the world and interweaving in the space around the house. If someone were to intrude, they would assuredly activate countless terrifying sword glows. Zheshio turned a blind eye to it and walked over. Those sword intents were still hidden in the darkness, unactivated as they slashed at his body. The disciples of South Stream Temple were well aware of the relationship between him and Chen Changsheng. The holy maiden had been invited into the imperial palace, so they were truly incapable of making a decision in such a short amount of time. There was no such thing as a truly flawless plan in the world. Even though Su Yurong was extremely skilled in divination and her fated star plate had contracted the starry sky, there were still some things that she could not calculate, like the human heart. Just like this, Zheshio walked past the sword array of South Stream Temple and entered the house. And then he saw Tang 36. Tang 36 was very worried about Chen Changsheng, so it was only natural that he would appear here. It was obvious that all the arrangements Su Yurong had left behind were of no use against him. "What is he doing?" Zheshio asked Tang 36. Only half a day had passed, but Tang 36 was already very tired. The fact that Chen Changsheng was about to die had placed an enormous psychological pressure on everyone. As Chen Changsheng's best friend, Zheshio's mood had been greatly affected. Tang 36 did not reply. He gazed at the tightly shut door, his expression somewhat gloomy. Zheshio said no more. He walked up and pushed open the door. There was no one in the room. Seeing the empty bed and the unoccupied desk, his and Tang 36's complexions instantly changed. After a while, Su Moyu, who had received the message, also arrived. "What do we do?" Su Moyu had a very worried expression. "We have to quickly report this to the Li Palace." After a moment of silence, Zheshio replied, "Don't. There is a type of colossal beast that, when it knows that it is about to die, will walk to a very distant place and calmly wait for its final moment to arrive. It is not willing to be seen by anyone, perhaps because it feels that only by doing this can it preserve its final dignity." Tang 36 said, "Chen Changsheng probably thinks this way." Zheshio said, "Before a cat dies, it will also do this." The bedding on the bed was neatly folded like a piece of tofu. The desk and bookshelves were spotless, as if they had just been bought today. When Chen Changsheng had left, it seemed like he had not brought anything with him, including those old books on the bookshelves and that rotten bamboo dragonfly. It was just that Xian Yuan was not present at this time, or else he might have discovered that the Orthodox Academy's kitchen was missing a cleaver for chopping bones. In addition, when Yi Xiaolian entered the library to rest, she discovered that a small box had appeared by her bedding. Opening the box, she saw a letter, signed by Chen Changsheng. He said that it was for Su Yurong. An hour before these events, in the middle of the night, Chen Changsheng had jumped out of the window of the library. Passing through the dense forest, he arrived at the kitchen on the other side of the lake. Taking out a cleaver, he opened the yellow paper umbrella, climbed over the newly built wall, and left the Orthodox Academy. The female disciples of South Stream Temple discovered that the target they had been protecting had disappeared. Not too long after, this news reached the manor on the outskirts of the city and the courtyard in the alley of the Northern Military Department. The crabapple tree in early autumn had naturally not bloomed, nor had it had time to shed its leaves. Its verdant leaves were like a carpet, gently brushing by the night wind. Starlight fell on the crimson official's gown and then reflected off the crabapple tree. The green leaves that rose and fell were plated with a scarlet luster, as if they had become a sea of blood. I do not like any variable that escapes my control. I hope that you can eliminate this variable as soon as possible. In other words, you only have one night to find him. Zhou Tong stood on the steps, gazing at the dense mass of kneeling officials in the courtyard. He expressionlessly said, and then, I don't care what method you use, you must kill him. The officials in the courtyard silently dispersed like a tide, leaving behind only the solitary crabapple tree and two officials dressed in crimson officials' gowns. There were very few officials that had the right to stand side by side with Zhou Tong, but Cheng Jun was one of them. As a powerful minister, similarly deeply trusted by the divine empress, he was only ranked below Zhou Tong in the 8 tigers of the common people. Intruding into the Orthodox Academy at night to assassinate him is one thing, but he has left the Orthodox Academy. If we still want to kill him in the capital, this is an open murder. The Pope will not let us go. Cheng Jun was an official of the Grand Court of Revision, but he did not have the slightest of the solemnity bestowed upon him by the laws of the Zhou dynasty. His triangular eyebrows hung down, his nose sunken and his lips thin. Just from his appearance, one would find him extremely repulsive. The officials that the divine empress had used at the very beginning were all rejected by the bureaucracy, once frustrated people. This was because, at the very beginning, there was not a single official that truly possessed both ability and integrity that was willing to pledge loyalty to her. Besides the empress, who in the world was willing to let go of people like us? A faint smile hung on Zhou Tong's face. Under the illumination of the starlight, his face seemed somewhat pale, as if he was not a living person. His smile also seemed strange and terrifying. The news that Chen Chongqing had left the Orthodox Academy was sent to that manor. The Tianhai clan's meeting was hastily concluded, and the people quickly dispersed. The will of the clan was subsequently spread throughout the capital. From the imperial guard to the capital government, countless people entered the darkness in an attempt to find Chen Chongqing and then kill him. Tianhai Qinwu walked under the autumn tree and gazed at that bright ball of light in the distance. He remained silent for a very long time. That was the dew platform, the empress's favorite place to stay. Gazing at his father's back, Tianhai Xingxue also remained silent. He felt that something was wrong today. Killing Qin Chongqing was naturally not an easy task, but it was not right to have the entire Tianhai clan erupt into such a frenzy. This was because this was too great of a force, because this was not necessarily enough to find Chen Chongqing. On the contrary, it was easier to alert the people on the other side, even somewhat like a notification. Why? Chapter 6:14. If we can kill him, that would naturally be for the best, but if we can't, then what? And don't forget that there has still been no sound from the palace. Perhaps the empress is also hesitating. Tianhai Qinwu gazed in the direction of the distant dew platform, exhaustion and disappointment appearing on his face. For the sake of the imperial throne, he had planned and prepared for 10-some years, but now it seemed that the road ahead was still shrouded in darkness. Perhaps it was very painful, but he had to begin considering other paths. Is father not worried about the future? Tianhai Xingxue asked. In the last few years, the Tianhai clan had enjoyed limitless glory, including the Chen imperial clan, the Tang clan, the Qiushan clan, the Zhu clan, and the Luofeng clan. These 1,000-year-old clans with deep reserves had all been firmly suppressed. If one were to say that these clans and those officials who were loyal to the imperial clan had no objections to the Tianhai clan, no one would believe it. If the Tianhai clan could not ascend to the imperial throne of the Great Zhou, when the time came when the wall was down, everyone would give it a push. Who would show mercy? He is Aunt's son, and the blood of my Tianhai clan flows in his body. Even if he ascends to the throne in the future, does that mean that his mother's clan must be exterminated? No, whether it's Shang Xingzhou or the Pope behind him. He will feel apprehensive and uneasy. In the end, he will still have to rely on our strength. Tianhai Chenwu gazed at the distant dew platform, his short beard lightly fluttering in the wind, giving off an extremely capable and unyielding feeling. We are not Zhou Tong, who will be shouted at and beaten by everyone the moment he loses his family, so we need to be more dependable. Tianhai Xingxue understood his father's meaning. But if the rumors were true, if Chen Chongsheng really was Crown Prince Xiaoming, then he would pose a threat to the divine empress. At a time like this, they had to consider the future ahead of time. He suddenly felt that the wind in the garden had grown cold, and then he remembered that it was already a bleak autumn. The Tianhai clan's current status was naturally inextricably linked to the divine empress. But just as the Tang Old Master often said while fishing on the banks of the Wenshui, the Tianhai clan and the Tianhai divine empress had never been one and the same. The Tianhai clan grasped many hidden forces in society. Even if they lost the divine empress's care, no faction could uproot the clan in a single night. A truly far-sighted and wise person would never place the future of a clan on a single person, even if that person was the most powerful person in the world. The Zhu clan of Tianliang County had prospered because of Zhu Luo, but now it was about to wither because of the fall of this expert. This was a lesson, a warning to all the other clans. Moreover, no matter how great a person was, there would always come a day when they would return to the sea of stars. Emperor Taizong was dead, Zhou Dufu was dead. Who could escape the two words of life and death? Countless people poured into the night from the Tianhai family's manor and the yamen controlled by the Tianhai family, beginning to search for Chen Chongsheng's whereabouts. This naturally alarmed many people, and those people immediately noticed the suspicious movements of the gloomy yamen in the alley of the Northern Military Department. Only then did they find out from the Orthodox Academy the source of all the commotion. Chen Chongsheng had left the Orthodox Academy, going somewhere unknown. A warning bell rang throughout the Li Palace, and the priests scattered into the night. The lights of the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education were simultaneously lit, illuminating the plum blossoms in the corridor with a bewitching beauty. 200-some cavalry galloped out from the maple forest, their hooves thundering as they galloped towards the Orthodox Academy. On the night of early autumn, the situation in the capital was abruptly tense and somber to the extreme. Yellow leaves drifted down from the sky. How to die? This was the question. Ordinary people were not very willing to ponder this question, and every time they thought about it, they would subconsciously avoid it. Chen Chongsheng's life was not ordinary, so he had pondered this question, and had pondered it many times. He had his own very clear answer, his own attitude: to live a lively life, to die a lonely death. This was the answer that Zheshio and Tang 36 had guessed, but it was not his answer. He might choose to live alone when he left this world, but in the period before that he would not live alone, lowering his head to lick his wounds in silence. He did not leave to find his own grave, but to do a few things. Zheshio's words had reminded him that this world truly was brimming with malice towards him, but the people living in this world had already shown him a great deal of kindness. Before he left this world, he wanted to return that kindness, to respond to that malice. This was something that he had to accomplish. On this quiet and beautiful autumn night, the streets and alleys of the capital were filled with the eyes of the various powers. The cavalry of the imperial court and the orthodoxy galloped through the streets at high speeds. Countless people were searching for him and then attempting to kill him or protect him. However, at this moment, he had already avoided everyone's line of sight. Raising the yellow paper umbrella, he noiselessly arrived at New North Bridge and then jumped into that dry well. The space at the bottom of the well was still pitch black and brimming with cold. His injuries had not completely recovered, so he fell deeper and deeper into the ground. His speed grew faster and faster, as if he wanted to become a stone that would perish together with the earth. However, when he was still several dozen zhang from the ground, A thick qi appeared beneath him like a soft cotton cushion, greatly reducing the speed at which he fell. This sort of situation had already occurred many times, so he did not panic. He adjusted his posture and waited for the qi to dissipate before his 2 feet very steadily landed on the snow-covered ground. A speck of light appeared on the ceiling of the cavern. It was a night pearl, and then countless night pearls began to light up one after the other, as if countless stars had descended into this world. A black silhouette the size of a mountain seemed to be moving slowly, but it was actually swiftly drifting over from the distance, looking down at him from above. Under the silver light, the black dragon's eyes, which were even larger than a building, glowed with a cold light. They were brimming with a tyrannical mood, yet they also gave off a feeling of indifference. This sort of meeting had already occurred many times, but this time was different. Neither Chen Chongsheng nor the black dragon spoke. In the cold wind, they silently stared at each other, the atmosphere somewhat oppressive. After an unknown amount of time, a dragon's roar brimming with anger reverberated through the underground cavern. The radiance of the night pearls that spilled down from the ceiling began to tremble, and the snow and frost on the ground danced in the air, lashing against Chen Chongsheng's body. Like a whip, it left behind many deep and shallow scars. Chen Chongsheng could understand what she was feeling at the moment, so he silently endured. The dragon's roar gradually faded, the wind and snow gradually ceased. The black dragon looked down at him, the indifference in its eyes gone. Only brutality and anger remained, as well as a hint of perplexity. You're going to die." After the dragon's roar faded, it was replaced by the voice of a young human girl. It could be heard that she was currently very flustered. Chen Chongsheng looked at the black dragon, feeling that for such a massive body and such a frightening level of cultivation, for its voice to be so clear and tender, the contrast was rather strong. Yes, the black dragon was once again enraged. Its tail, which was over 10 li away, struck towards the wall. But before it could land, it was sent flying by the formation on the wall, causing innumerable amounts of snow and frost to scatter. But the black dragon looked at Chen Chongsheng, a hint of pain appearing in its eyes. Perhaps it was due to the backlash from the formation, or perhaps it was because it had seen the sorrowful scene of his future, but its voice trembled slightly. "You still haven't learned the dragon language. I'm sorry." Chen Chongsheng lowered his head, and after a while he raised it up, looked at her, and said, "In this lifetime I might not be able to learn the dragon language." Then you're not allowed to die." Chen Chongsheng said nothing. The black dragon sorrowfully said, "You haven't even done what you promised me. How can you die?" "I'm sorry." Chen Chongsheng apologized once more, saying, "I once promised you that I would find a way to rescue you from this place. Yes." The black dragon's eyes suddenly brightened, and she hurriedly said, "You still haven't rescued me. How can you die? I won't allow you to die like this." "Don't worry. I've already thought of a way to rescue you." Chen Chongsheng looked at her and smiled, very happy and very sincere. On the journey back from Mount Han, I had a lot of time to think, calculate for a very long time, and confirm that we still have to start with the scroll of time. In a little while, I will go to the stone wall and complete the array, ensuring that the power of the scroll of time can be maintained for a very long time. However, if we only rely on the array, we might need a very long time to use the power of time to remove the seal. So I recommend that you begin cultivating the scroll of time on your own. Perhaps it can speed up time. He suddenly thought of something and said, "That's right, I met Wang Jitsa in Mount Han, but I was in too much of a hurry at the time, so I forgot to ask him about these things." Upon hearing that person's name, the black dragon, who was still immersed in the anger and sorrow of Chen Chongsheng's impending death, couldn't help but stare blankly. She asked in surprise, "That swindler is still alive?" Chen Chongsheng replied, although he did not admit his identity, it should not be wrong. The black dragon's voice turned cold, brimming with hatred. "It truly is the case that the wicked live for 10,000 years." Chen Chongsheng didn't know what to say. From the perspective of the black dragon, She was just an ignorant little girl of the dragon race. Although she had committed many sins after coming ashore from the southern sea, being imprisoned for several hundred years was enough to atone for her sins. Why was she imprisoned forever in this underground world that never saw the light of day? But from Wang Jitse's perspective, as the military advisor and half-guardian of the great Zhou dynasty, he naturally had the responsibility to protect the common people of the great Zhou. Qun Changsheng. The black dragon's voice suddenly became calm. He was somewhat confused. The black dragon's voice resounded, cold and tinged with a faint sorrow. You shouldn't have been a good person. Why? Because good people don't live long. Chun Changsheng once again lowered his head, gazing at the frost beneath his feet. He thought back to the path of ice and rain that he had traversed in these past few years and fell silent for a very long time. He had always believed that people like Wang Po were good people and that he definitely couldn't be considered one. He was only doing things that pleased his heart because cultivation was to follow one's heart. It was a pity that life and death were up to the heavens, but they were not willing to listen to one's own heart. He raised his head to look at the black dragon, wanting to say a few words of explanation, but he suddenly discovered that the black dragon had disappeared. Just like that, the mountain-like body of the dragon disappeared into thin air. Qun Changsheng was abnormally shocked. He looked around, wanting to understand just what had happened. Then he saw that a girl had appeared in the snow. The girl was dressed in black and sat in the snow. Her skirt was spread out and two thin chains extended from the back of her skirt, extending towards the stone wall 10 odd li away. Chapter 615. The little girl's face was as beautiful as a painting. She was like a newly born black lotus, but her eyes were very indifferent. Deep inside, there was a sense of cruelty, added with her black vertical pupils. She looked very strange. Qun Changsheng couldn't say anything for a long time. He had already guessed who this little girl in black was, especially after seeing the scimitar-like bloodline between her eyebrows. He knew that based on the lifespan of the dragon race, she was a little girl. He once heard Su Yurong say that she was a little girl, but he still didn't think that she was actually a little girl. After an unknown amount of time, Qun Changsheng finally awoke from this shock. He walked towards her. His movement was a little slow because he was a little nervous. The little girl raised her head and glanced at him. She seemed a little impatient and cold. Qun Changsheng looked at the indifference and cruelty in her eyes. He felt a little uncomfortable because he was looking down on him, but he knew that this was not her nature. It wasn't that she looked down on him. It was the instinct of a higher level being to look down on a lower level being, just like how humans looked at cows and horses on the grassland. Maybe there was love, sympathy, or respect, but it was the feeling of looking down on him. This was something that couldn't be changed. Qun Changsheng walked in front of her. She lowered her head slightly. It seemed like she didn't want him to see her face clearly, or maybe she was pretending to be indifferent to hide her nervousness. But she didn't know that for human males, lowering their head would easily make them think that she was gentle and shy. I didn't know you could be like this. Qun Changsheng didn't know what to say. He knew why she was willing to meet him in human form. Because he was about to die. She wanted to express something. He didn't know what she wanted to express, but he had a vague guess. So he couldn't help but be nervous. I won't let you die. The little girl raised her head and said to Qun Changsheng. At this time, she had already recovered her calmness and indifference. She was sitting on the ground and was much shorter than Qun Changsheng. But when she looked up, it seemed like she was looking down on him. Her tone was like an order or an order. Qun Changsheng thought to himself, how could I be willing to die? Then he remembered that Yurong seemed to have said something similar to him during the day before she went to the imperial palace. Just now I said that the scroll of time should be able to help you break the seal and leave. Since last year, Yurong and I have been discussing how to save you. On this journey, she also gave us many ideas. The array I laid down was actually a sketch she drew. For some reason, Chun Chongqing looked at her and said these words very seriously. Perhaps it was because he vaguely guessed that he didn't want her to have any opinions about Yurong in the future. The little girl turned her head away and refused to say a word. She did not expect Su Yurong to help her. She was a little surprised, but that was all. Chun Chongqing said, "I thought you would at least thank her. She's with you every day, but you're about to die. Do you think I'll thank her?" The little girl's voice suddenly became sharp, and she seemed very angry. Chun Chongqing didn't know what to say. Logically speaking, they were already very familiar with each other after meeting so many times. However, this was his first time meeting the little girl, so he couldn't help but feel a little strange and awkward. "This, Lady Gigi. I said not to call me Gigi." The little girl glared at him and said, "I have a name." Chun Chongqing recalled that Su Yurong had once told him that the little black dragon seemed to have had a name. It seemed to be Zhu Sha, but before he could say it, "I'm called Hong Zhuang," the little girl expressionlessly said to him. Chun Chongqing naturally wouldn't argue with her over such a trivial matter. He said, "I'm going to lay down the array. Do you want to come with me to take a look?" From last autumn to this summer, he had come here many times to study the array on the stone wall, pondering how to break the array and help the little black dragon escape. He had never once allowed her to watch. It wasn't that his method of breaking the array was some secret, but that she wasn't interested or that she didn't believe that Chun Chongqing had the ability to break the seal Wang Jitsa had laid down. But today he wanted to invite her to come with him to take a look, because there might not be a chance in the future. The little black dragon thought it over, then stood up. Turning around, she walked to the distant stone wall. Because it was rather inconvenient for her to move, she very naturally lifted her black dress, revealing her bare feet. Her bare feet were as white as snow, and when they stepped on the frost on the ground, the frost instantly paled in comparison. 2 thin chains were tied to her ankles. The chains were pitch black and rusted, contrasting with her snow-white ankles, making them even more distinct. Several centuries had passed, and she had tried to escape countless times underground. The chains had already sunk deep into her ankles, the wounds clearly visible, and even her white bones could be faintly seen. Just looking at this sight made her feel pain, let alone herself. Chun Chongqing walked up and took the chains in his hands, carefully ensuring that they wouldn't rub against her ankles. Although her abilities were shackled by the array, she still retained many of the dragon race's natural abilities, allowing her to freely move through the underground space. Chun Chongqing's speed was also very astonishing. Logically speaking, they should have been able to quickly travel 10-some li, but for some reason, they were moving very slowly. The night pearls in the ceiling, like a sky full of stars, were extinguished one by one. She lifted the hem of her dress, and he lifted the chains, vanishing into the darkness. The gloomy rays of light fell on the stone wall, casting the faces of the 2 legendary divine generals into uncertainty. The chains in their hands seemed to be coated in the venom of the shaman race, chilling to the heart. Chun Chongqing stood in front of the stone wall, looking at the portrait and the array hidden in the stone wall. After a few moments of thought, he took out the things he had already prepared from his sheath and began to lay down the array. Time slowly passed. He was especially focused, his brow creasing from time to time, though he didn't know whether it was because he had encountered some obstacle or because of the pain from his internal injuries. The little black dragon habitually sat on the snow-covered ground, raising her small face to look at the portrait on the stone wall. She seemed to be in a daze, thinking about something. Regret and frustration could be faintly seen in her indifferent eyes, but only when she looked at Chun Chongqing would those negative emotions gradually fade. After some time, Chun Chongqing finally finished laying down the array. He carefully examined it twice and confirmed that there were no problems. Only then did he truly breathe a sigh of relief. More than 2 years ago, when he had come to this place from the underground of the Imperial Palace, He had spent a very long time studying these two chains that imprisoned the black dragon. He had used all the knowledge of the Taoist techniques he had learned in his life, and he had received much help from Su Rong in the last half-year. He was confident that it would definitely be effective. He took out the scroll of time and gave it to the black dragon, then looked at her with a serious expression and asked, "Do you have any method to temporarily put yourself into a coma?" The little black dragon stared at him with wide eyes, thinking, what sort of request is this? Qin Chongqing was originally prepared to say something, but seeing her expression, he knew that she would not agree. He could only say, "No matter what happens in a little while, it's best if you can endure it." The little black dragon suddenly felt that something was wrong and prepared to strike him down, but she was too late. Noiselessly, like the leaves of a willow tree cutting through the breeze of early spring, the peerlessly sharp stainless sword was unsheathed and then slashed down. A small cut was made on Qin Chongqing's wrist, blood gushing out. There was clearly something wrong with his blood. It was suffused with a faint golden color and seemed to contain boundless energy. It was incomparably pure and holy, yet it also gave off an extremely bewitching feeling. His blood of the sacred light also contained Su Rong's true blood of the heavenly phoenix. As he cut open his wrist, the blood came into contact with the frigid winds of the underground space. An indescribable fragrance began to spread out with incomprehensible speed. This fragrance was very much like the smell of grass, but it was even more like the smell of dew on the grass, like the smell of freshly born fruits, and even more like the smell of freshly ripened fruits that had been blown by the night wind for an entire night. If this situation were allowed to continue, this smell would travel along New North Bridge and into the capital. Perhaps all the people of the capital would go crazy, and even the birds of the Mausoleum of Books would madly fly over. Fortunately, or perhaps because Qin Chongqing had long since prepared for this, the array he had just laid down contained the array intent that Su Rong had used the Tong Bao to isolate the smell of blood for him in Mount Han, using the sacred light in his blood as a foundation. It could effectively eliminate the smell of blood, coupled with the extreme coldness naturally exuded by the black dragon. It could ensure that before the smell naturally faded, it would not drift out of New North Bridge. But there was a problem. The little black dragon was at his side within the range of the array. She had been watching him do this the entire time, so she had naturally smelled the smell. A crisp clang resounded. The chains were stretched taut and her body floated into the air, her black hair madly dancing behind her and her black dress similarly dancing. Her beautiful face was ruthless and merciless, like that of a god or demon. Her bewitching vertical pupils surged with countless emotions, extremely complex and conflicted. It was the natural intimacy of a supreme life form to another supreme divine energy, but also the boundless desire of an expert towards true eternal life, and even more so the instinctive desire of all living things. She looked down at Qin Chongqing, greedy yet uneasy, yearning yet sorrowful. She constantly struggled, until finally she gradually calmed down. Calmness did not mean safety. Although she was a noble and powerful black frost dragon, she was still young. Moreover, she had left the southern sea as a child and had not received the complete education of the dragon race. So she had not learned how to control her desires, how to prevent her mind and will from being controlled by these desires. Her expression was very calm, but her eyes were brutal. She had decided to eat Qin Chongqing because he was too delicious. Moreover, she had enough reason to eat Qin Chongqing. Even if the will of the heavenly Tao descended from the starry sky to question her, she would feel no shame. "You heartless thing, I gave you my first blood, but you're still fooling around with other women. In order to fulfill the oath I made back then, I'll eat you alive." After saying this, her chi soared with terrifying speed, instantly breaking through several realms and arriving at the divine domain. She then lunged at Qin Chongqing. On the last day of the 8th month, without saying anything else, I just want to say, thank you everyone. I like everyone very much. Don't think that I haven't said anything recently, but I've actually been watching this entire time. Chapter 616. Fresh blood dripped from Chen Changsheng's wrist onto the iron chain, emitting a chi-chi sound. The blood began to flow along the carved lines, corroding towards the depths of the iron chain. The blood that remained on the surface of the iron chain melted upon contact with the wind, igniting into a faint blue flame, spraying endless light and heat in all directions. This was the formidable might of the phoenix blood. The lines carved into the chains and the stone wall began to exude bright rays of light. The array slowly activated, and an indescribable chi, like the leaves of spring and fruits of autumn, appeared. This chi seemed to contain a fragment of the divine power of time. At this moment, the little black dragon came to the surface, her black hair madly dancing and her beautiful face brimming with a fiendish aura. Her black clothes were also madly dancing, and one could faintly see shards of ice sprinkling down like diamonds. This meant that she had already raised her chi to its peak. At this moment, she was already standing in the divine domain. Let alone Qin Changsheng, not even a powerful divine general like Xue Xingchuan would necessarily be a match for her in a duel. At this moment, Chen Changsheng's mind and attention were completely focused on the thin chains. He seemed to have forgotten everything else around him, as if he had also forgotten the fatal allure of his blood. But when the little black dragon spoke of first blood, oaths and women, his left hand had trembled. This meant that he had actually been clear-headed this entire time. How could he forget the curse of fate the heavenly Tao had placed on him? How could he forget Senior Yu Ren's exhortations in that night temple? He had naturally already prepared a plan to deal with the possibly deranged little black dragon. Two extremely heavy sounds came from the stone wall, like someone was beating a war drum from deep within the stone wall, or like two peals of thunder from the extremely distant night sky. In the scene on the stone wall, the hands of the two legends gripping the chains suddenly exploded with intense white light, ultimately transforming into two almost condensed balls of white light about the size of eggs. These two balls of white light rapidly traveled along the chains, instantly arriving at the pair of snow-white ankles. No one could be faster than these two balls of white light. Even the fastest Su Yurong and Nank would find it impossible to avoid them. The infinitely strengthened black dragon, who had once more stepped into the divine domain, could spend the day in the southern sea and the night in the western continent, but she could not be faster. These two balls of white light moved as fast as lightning, because they had always been lightning. Crack! Crack! Two extremely clear sounds exploded in the quiet underground space. The little black dragon stopped in the air behind Qin Changsheng. Her wildly dancing black hair and black clothes were filled with incandescent lightning, and the fiendish intent on her beautiful face had vanished without a trace. The two thin chains on her ankles trembled at a high speed, making clanking sounds, like willows in a gale that could snap at any time. With a cry of anger and pain, she fell heavily to the ground. She wanted to stand up, but she was unable to do so. Her petite body that was covered by the black clothes was still trembling slightly. It looked very strange, but also had an indescribable charm. After an unknown period of time, the power of thunder that had entered her body through the chains finally dissipated, and the lightning and snow disappeared at the same time. She sat up with difficulty. Her small face was abnormally pale, and her vertical pupils still had lingering fear. The way she looked at Chen Changsheng was no longer as crazed and greedy as before, but with hatred. Chen Changsheng turned his head to look at her. The corners of his lips perked up in a smile. His face was also very pale, most likely because he had lost too much blood and consumed too much of his soul in order to activate the array to break the seal. He was well aware that doing this would only accelerate the rate at which his injuries would erupt. To put it another way, he would die even earlier than he had calculated. But he had still done this without hesitation, because this was something he had promised her a long time ago. Before his death, he wanted to complete this task. Only then could he easily leave. "What's with your blood? It smells even better than when you were in meditative introspection." "Just now, I actually couldn't control my thoughts," the little black dragon asked, her heart still fluttering with fear. Chun Chang Sheng pointed at the 2 iron chains tied to her ankles. His meaning was very clear. He knew that the formation that Wang Jisu had left behind back then would create a powerful restriction on certain aspects of her. "Since you knew, why didn't you tell me ahead of time so that I could prepare myself?" The little black dragon hatefully said, "Truly a bad person." At this time, the wound on Qin Changxing's wrist had already healed. The sacred light barrier that Su Yurong had placed on his body had begun to take effect once more. The blood on the chains had already seeped into the chains or been transformed into energy by the array, so he no longer had to worry about arousing the little black dragon's vicious nature or attracting other experts. Chan Changxing walked up to her and stuffed several dozen pills that he had asked the priests of the Li Palace to refine into her mouth. Then he lightly caressed her back to help her digest the medicine. The little black dragon slightly squinted her eyes, apparently enjoying being caressed like this. After a while, he came to his senses and recalled what Mou had once said to Su Yurong. Only then did he realize that she was a little girl and that it truly was rather inappropriate for him to hug her like this. So he quickly let go. The little black dragon opened her eyes wide and glared at him, clearly displeased. "Of course, I'm not completely confident." Chen Changxing paused, then continued to explain her previous question. "When I risked meditation and ignited the snowy plains of star radiance in my body, if not for you saving me, I would have died long ago. Since you gave me this life, it's only right that I return it to you. If I'm fated to be eaten by someone, you're probably the only person I can accept." Whether it was because of these words or the word person, the little black dragon became happy, very happy. Then, as she thought of something, her cheeks began to glow red. She lowered her head, unwilling to look at him. She whispered, "Scoundrel." Chun Changxing froze, not understanding why she was cursing him, why she was angry. After thinking it over, he took out a chest and placed it in front of her, saying, "This is for you." The little black dragon raised her head and looked at the chest, her bright eyes brimming with curiosity. "What is it?" She opened the chest, her beautiful face illuminated by light. The chest was filled with precious gold, silver, and jewels. Some had been bestowed to him by White Emperor City, some had been given to him by the Li Palace, some had been given to him by the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education. Some had been given to him by Tang 36 to play with. Some had been from the mausoleum of Zhou, and all sorts of treasures. This was 1/3 of his entire fortune. Of course, this was all that remained after he had divided up his assets with Su Yurong last winter. He had left 1/3 for Luoluo, 1/3 for his senior brother, and 1/3 for the little black dragon. He believed that these were the 3 people who treated him the best. As she looked at the treasures in the chest, the little black dragon's eyes grew brighter and brighter. "Do you like it?" Chun Changxing looked at her, somewhat nervous but also hopeful. She lowered her head and softly grunted in affirmation. There was no dragon that did not like gold and silver, let alone the fact that she had been imprisoned underground for several hundred years. It was only by relying on the gold and silver promised to her by those important figures of the imperial palace that she had been able to survive, and this was something that he had specially left for her. She raised her head and earnestly said to Qin Changxing, "Did you know? It's already been many years since I left my home in the Southern Sea and came to the land of you humans. But only after I got to know you did I live a happy life, so I truly am very grateful to you." Qin Changxing thought of her experiences, thought of his own life, and naturally felt a sense of empathy for her. "My happiest days were when I transformed into a wandering soul and followed you out of the capital, all the way to Hanzhou City. I saw many sights and ate many delicious foods. The scenery in the Garden of Zhou was also not bad. I don't like the Garden of Zhou." "Why?" "Because Royal Father died in there." Qin Changxing said nothing. the little black dragon, sneered at him. And in the garden of Zhou, you and that woman were so lovey-dovey that you forgot who I was long ago. What was there for me to be happy about? Chun Changsheng felt rather helpless. At the time, I didn't know that she was Suyu Rong, and, in my heart, you are a senior worthy of respect. The little black dragon ignored him and hatefully said, in any case, you're just a heartless and fickle fellow. Chun Changsheng thought, where did the word heartless come from? He suddenly thought of the words the little black dragon had said just before she was about to eat him. He thought, if that's really the case, then using this sort of one-sided oath to restrain her actions is truly rather unreasonable, or perhaps childish. He was not very old, but he had always been calm and composed, so he naturally would not childishly argue with her. But seeing that he was silent, she became even more angry. She opened her mouth and blew a breath of air into his face. She was a black frost dragon, so the air she blew was a dragon's breath. Logically speaking, when the dragon breath descended, Chun Changsheng should have been instantly frozen into a block of ice, just like he had been the last few times. She had originally thought this way, prepared to properly tidy him up, but she had forgotten that in the past she had always used her original form as a black frost dragon to meet with Chun Changsheng. Now, she had transformed into a human girl. Putting aside her other cultivation levels, she could at least no longer breathe out dragon breath. Her current dragon breath was a single breath. This breath was like an orchid, indescribably fragrant and devoid of any power. Just like that, it blew onto Chun Changsheng's face. Strangely enough, Chun Changsheng's body had been perfectly cleansed by her dragon blood, making it impossible for ordinary weapons to wound him. Her breath clearly had no power, but his face still turned red. The little black dragon froze, then somewhat stupidly blew another breath onto his face. Chun Changsheng's face grew redder and redder, especially his ears. Just like his faded star, they were completely red. The little black dragon blinked her eyes in confusion, but in the next moment she realized what she was doing. Instantly, countless feelings of embarrassment surged into her mind, her small face instantly becoming incomparably red. She felt that her face was very hot, and even her body was heating up. She had forgotten that she was a black frost dragon. With just a thought, even a volcano could be frozen. Volcanoes could be frozen. Ice and snow could be melted. She felt her body grow soft from the heat, somewhat powerless to support herself. Slowly, she leaned against Chun Changsheng's chest. Her breath was like the wind brushing against the snow lotuses of a glacier, lightly passing by his ear. Chun Changsheng's body seemed to be frozen, not daring to move at all. Suddenly, he felt a little wet. It was because she had stuck out the tip of her clove-like tongue and licked his earlobe. The taste is truly fragrant. She leaned against his shoulder and softly said, "If you really want to die, then let me eat you, let you die in my stomach." Back in the underground space, when Gigi used her dragon breath to deal with him, I kept thinking about the scene in today's chapter. I swore that I would definitely write it down and not forget it. After I wrote it, I felt that it was so frivolous. I really like it. In addition, this month's book review activity has already begun. Everyone can go to the book review area to participate. The deadline for leaving your comments is tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. The prizes are as generous as ever, but the peripherals have yet to arrive. Students who have won prizes might have to wait for a while. Chapter 617. He didn't know how much time had passed. It could have been very long. It could have been very short. Chun Changsheng awoke from his stupor and dashed away as if he was fleeing. The little black dragon watched his back disappear into the darkness, a hint of fiendish intent appearing on her face. The expression in her vertical pupils became abnormally cold. The seal that Wang Jitsa had left on the stone wall prevented her from recovering her true strength. But if she wanted to, she could still easily grab Chun Changsheng and eat him. Otherwise, how could she have become the so-called taboo, that no one in the imperial palace dared to mention. But she did not do this. The anger in her vertical pupils gradually dissipated, leaving behind only loneliness, grievance, and stubbornness. She was keenly aware that Chan Chongsheng wanted to flee not because he was afraid of being eaten by her, but because he wanted to escape from something else. Without the little black dragon's help, Chen Chongsheng would not have been able to use the pond to return to the surface. The path he had chosen was the one he had taken when he first mistakenly entered the underground world. When he pushed open the heavy stone door and returned to the cold palace that he had not seen for a very long time, he gazed at the distant, endless palace and couldn't help but feel a little emotional. Back then, when Mou used the two-mind connection and borrowed the array formation in the palace to trap him in the never-ending palace, she probably never thought that he would really have the courage to enter the underground to face the legendary Taboo, and thus find a chance of survival. Similarly, he never thought that the Taboo was a girl of the dragon race who looked violent and cold on the surface, but was actually a little naive and ignorant. Furthermore, he actually had so many connections and stories with this girl. Standing in the autumn trees by the black dragon pool and gazing at the famous Tong Palace array, he fell into deep thought. He was well versed in the Taoist canon and had studied arrays quite a bit. Although he could not compare to Su Yorong or Go Hanshi, he could still be considered a well-known figure amongst the cultivators of the world. Thus, when he was trapped here, he was able to discover that the life gate of this array was deep within the cold pool. In order to remove the seal that Wang Jitsa had laid down, he had prepared for a very long time. Coupled with Su Yorong's help, he believed that in 10 years at most, the two chains would gradually lose their effectiveness and the little black dragon would be able to regain her freedom. If she also cultivated the scroll of time he had left underground, the time could be shortened a little. But at that time, he would probably no longer be here. After 1,000 years, the white clouds drifted leisurely. Things remained the same, but people had changed. But in the end, there were still some people or things he couldn't let go of. South Stream Temple had a divine artifact with the same name as the famous array in this cold palace. Tong Palace. The Tong Palace was in her hands. She should be in the palace at this time, not far from him. Chun Chongsheng walked around the edge of the pond and followed a stone path out of the back door of the Tong Palace. He came to a forest and looked at the palace complex in the distance. He didn't want to die alone, but he didn't want her to see him when he left this world. He was prepared to go to the Garden of Zhou in a little while. There was no one there and no one could enter. Before that, he still had some things to do. A soft rustling sound came from the front of the forest, and several leaves that were turning yellow but still green fell to the ground. The black goat walked out from the forest. Looking at Chin Chongsheng, it tilted its head slightly, seemingly confused as to why he would appear here today and not by the pond. Chun Chongsheng bowed deeply towards the black goat and gave a serious bow. "Thank you for taking care of me these past 2 years." The black goat turned around, gazing at a certain part of the palace complex. Chun Chongsheng understood its meaning and shook his head. "I'm not going there." The black goat turned around and calmly gazed at him, its gloomy eyes like the deepest darkness. "I have lived my entire life earnestly or perhaps rigidly, because I hope to live a few more years this way. Now that I've confirmed that I can't live a few more years, if I carefully think about it, my greatest regret is that I've never lived without restraint. I cultivate the Tao of following my heart, but when have I ever truly followed my heart?" Ever since he had confirmed the date of his death, Chin Chongsheng had never revealed his true thoughts to anyone, but now he expressed them to the black goat. "So before I die, I've decided to do something that I've always wanted to do. If I succeed, I think I'll be very happy. Kill east and kill west, kill things, so it was just the word kill. Kill all those who oppose you, and then there will naturally be no one who opposes you. Kill the heaven and earth that dare to oppose your will, and then the heaven and earth will naturally submit to your will. But what if the heaven, earth, and man all submit? What happens outside the heaven and earth? What does the human heart matter?" After hearing the divine empress's words, Su Yorong was quiet for a very long time. This was the Empress's domineering declaration, and also the Empress's instruction to her, the sole successor. She needed to think for a while, and at the same time, she was silently deducing and calculating. Back when she had told Qin Changsheng that she wanted to enter the imperial palace to plead for leniency from the Empress, Qin Changsheng had said that it was meaningless. Now, seeing the divine Empress's cold attitude, it seemed to be true. In truth, anyone could have expected this result. But she had still come to the imperial palace, in order to do her best and leave the will of the heavens, only hoping that she could plead for tensome days of peace and quiet for Qin Changsheng? No, she was a person of the Taoist sect, but she had her own edge and did not cultivate inaction. From the moment she had left Mount Han until last night, she had always been calculating and calculating, her slender fingers never leaving the fated star plate. She had attempted to see the heavenly Tao, had attempted to pull apart the fog of fate, had attempted to see the true path ahead, but the result of her countless calculations had always been the same. In order for Qin Changsheng to escape from the trap of fate, there was only one nearly illusory thread of fate, and the other end of it was connected to the Empress. Logically speaking, the punishment of the heavenly Tao that Qin Changsheng had received was the effect of the oath the Empress had made when she sacrificed herself to the starry sky. The one who wanted him dead the most was also the Empress, so if she wanted to undo that thread of fate, she naturally had to rely on the Empress. But she knew that the meaning faintly revealed by fate was not like this. To see a mountain as a mountain, not a mountain, and still a mountain, in the end a mountain was still a mountain, but its meaning was different. Thus, she had left the Orthodox Academy and come to the imperial palace. She firmly believed that this journey would bring about some change. Yet a very long time had passed since daytime, yet no change had occurred. The porcelain cup continued to turn on her fingertips. From day to night, it seemed as if it had never stopped, just like the water wheel on a stream, just like time itself. The art of deduction in the end is to exhaust all changes, but the heavenly Tao is indescribable and uncountable. So how can it be calculated? The divine Empress suddenly placed the porcelain cup on the table and gave her a glance. This glance seemed to have seen through everything. Su Yorong was silent for a while and replied, "Although I can't truly touch it, I can always get closer." The divine Empress said, "Right now, you don't even understand the human heart. How can you talk about getting closer to the heavenly Tao?" Su Yorong's face became somewhat pale, because she faintly felt that the change she had been waiting for had already occurred. Yet that change was not what she wanted. "You laid down the sword array in the Orthodox Academy, then asked the Li Palace to send people to help. Then you came to the Imperial Palace to see me. You thought that by doing this you could isolate him from the world and isolate me from his world. Then you waited for the heavenly Tao to naturally operate and tried to find a trace of change. Yet no matter how you calculated, you missed one thing." The divine Empress looked at her calmly and said, "You forgot that he was also calculating." Su Yorong knew that she was wrong. What if Qin Changsheng left the Orthodox Academy himself? Without her present, no one could stop his departure. The Empress summoned her to the imperial palace to create this kind of opportunity for Qin Changsheng. In other words, when she was trying to choose a possible path for Qin Changsheng, the Empress already knew what choice Qin Changsheng would make. "Empress, is it because you are mother and son that you understand him so well?" Su Yorong looked at her, and her voice became somewhat cold. The divine Empress said, "Even now, you still haven't forgotten to mention this matter and try to tug at my heartstrings. You are quite persistent, child." A stubborn expression appeared on Su Yorong's beautiful face, and she said, "But isn't what I said the truth?" "Of course it isn't the truth." The divine Empress's voice was as steady as gold and jade. "I understand him because I have understood him before." She stood up and once again walked to the window and looked out of the imperial palace. The evening clouds had already become a sky full of stars. Her voice was also more indifferent than it was during the day, and even seemed a bit cold. In the eyes of ordinary people, the so-called saints know everything, but they don't know that after crossing that threshold, they are still in the mortal world. The reason why saints don't make mistakes is because saints can't make mistakes. Once they make a mistake, they will be covered by the mortal world and will never be able to escape. These words, accompanied by her cold voice, fell into Su Yurong's ears and heart. I have never feared things like the heavenly Tao or fate. They treat you and me like oxen and horses, so I treat them like oxen and horses. I take the reins, hang the heavy plow, use them to open up new territory, use them to bring favorable weather. But now that I think about it, I have the intention to use the heavenly Tao and fate, which is to admit that it is useful, admit that it has a strength that surpasses my own abilities. And this was the greatest mistake I made back then. Once I made such a judgment, there was a dust in my soul that could never be washed away. The divine empress turned around and said to Su Yurong, perhaps because she was speaking of the heavenly Tao, her expression was very solemn and her perfect face seemed to be imbued with a divine aura. Su Yurong was keenly aware that this was also a teaching, and it was probably a true meaning that no one besides herself had ever heard. From childhood until now, this sort of scene had occurred many times, and she had long since gotten used to it, but this time was different. Because the Empress spoke of the most profound, supreme, and wondrous heavenly Tao, spoke of content that was extremely disrespectful to the heavenly Tao, and she faintly understood why the Empress was saying these things to her. In the future, there will be a day when you will become as powerful as me. I hope that you can become even more powerful, so I will not permit you to make the same mistake as me. The divine Empress looked into her eyes and said, if the heavenly Tao is before, it should be slain. If the threads of emotion are before, it should be slain even more. When Su Yurong heard these last words, which proved her conjecture, her body shivered. You are my successor. The divine Empress walked up to her and looked down at her from above. She calmly said, I will slay anyone or anything that will obstruct your great Tao. Su Yurong's complexion became even paler, and her usually incomparably bright eyes were tinged with sadness. I like Qiushan very much, but you do not accept him, which I like very much. You like Qinchangshen. Although he has many points worth liking, I still don't like him. You shouldn't waste your life on such pointless things. So the more you care about Qinchangshen, the more I want to kill him. Su Yurong was quiet for a very long time. Her face grew whiter and whiter, until finally it was like snow, no other color visible. Her eyes, however, gradually regained their brightness, like a mountain forest that had passed through the mist and once more welcomed the morning light. Then it was like a winter-sweet had sprouted from the snowy plains, a smear of red. Gradually, the winter-sweet blossomed, and her face grew redder and redder. With a hum, a gale howled through the hall, and two pure white wings, Tenajong, unfurled from her back. She flew into the air, emitting blazing rays of light and a divine and powerful qi. She ignited the true blood of the heavenly phoenix in her body, raising her cultivation to its peak state, even surpassing the upper limits of what her body could endure. She was the holy maiden of the orthodoxy, representing purity and light, wielding the divine strength bestowed upon her by countless stars. She was still only at the peak of ethereal opening, so of course she had not truly entered the divine domain. But in this state, she already possessed some of the characteristics and aura of the divine domain. She had the strength to fight against the experts at the top of the proclamation of liberation, and even experts on the level of the storms of the 8 directions would require some time and methods to completely suppress her. She had never thought that she could threaten the divine Empress. She only wanted to buy some time to break this trap woven by the heavenly Tao or the human heart. Even if she could only release a tiny bit of light, if she could illuminate the great Zhou Imperial Palace, perhaps illuminate the capital and let the Li Palace see. But in the next moment, the wind in the hall stopped. Those scattered rays of pure and holy light vanished without a trace. The pair of pure white wings on her back powerlessly drooped down. A hand gripped her throat. It was the divine Empress's hand. This hand seemed very delicate, but at this moment it seemed incomparably terrifying. The divine Empress was not very tall or large, but when she extended her arm, she lifted Suyu Rong into the air. A pair of black wings over 100 zhang in length unfurled from her back, breaking through the two sides of the vast hall and slowly undulating in the darkness. This scene was abnormally monstrous, yet it also possessed a soul-shaking beauty. Chapter 618. The night breeze came from the gigantic black wings. It scattered all the holiness and light, blocked all sight and perception. It represented the purest darkness and power. The young phoenix is clearer than the old phoenix. That's in the future. The divine queen looked at Suyu Rong in her hand and said, expressionlessly, "No one could enter this darkness except for the people she allowed," like that read. Mo Yu kneeled outside the palace with her head down. She didn't dare to look inside. Send her back to the Holy Maiden Peak. Let her go after confirming Chen Changsheng's death. Hearing the divine queen's voice, Mo Yu finally dared to raise her head. She wanted to say something, but she didn't. The green bamboo carriage was ready. The black goat came back from somewhere. The divine queen looked at the black goat. After a moment of silence, she nodded. The carriage wheels rolled over the green stone and slowly moved towards the darkness outside the royal palace. Mo Yu sat on the seat and looked at the sleeping Suyu Rong. She suddenly felt sad. She felt sad for Suyu Rong and sad for Qin Changsheng. Qin Changsheng was dead for sure. Actually, she also felt sad. She hadn't been to the Tradition Academy for a long time. She hadn't seen Qin Changsheng. She had no reason to go. Even if Qin Changsheng died, she had no reason to feel sad. Thinking of this, she felt even sadder. The bamboo carriage seemed slow, but it was actually extremely fast. Moreover, it had an indescribable strangeness to it. Although there weren't many pedestrians on the street at night, there were many cavalrymen and experts who were searching for Qin Changsheng and wanted to protect him. Yet, none of them noticed this carriage. It didn't take long before the bamboo carriage left the capital through the south gate and went on the official road to the Holy Maiden Peak. Almost at the same time they left the capital, Suyu Rong opened her eyes. It wasn't because she had hidden something, but because it was the divine queen's will. She opened her eyes, but she couldn't do anything. She couldn't even move a finger, because in her waterfall-like black hair, there was a hairpin that seemed to be casually stuck in a slanted angle. Or it could be said that it was a wooden hairpin, ranked third on the tier of legendary weapons. Wooden sword Little Phoenix. Suyu Rong couldn't move, but she could talk. However, she clearly wasn't in the mood to talk at this time. She just quietly looked at the roof of the carriage. No one knew where her gaze would land in the starry sky. Everyone has their own fate. If his fate isn't good, what can we do about it? Mo Yu looked at her and said with pity. Suyu Rong withdrew her gaze and said to her, "I don't think he will die." Mo Yu naturally knew of Qin Changsheng's current condition. She thought to herself, even if the Pope can protect him from being killed by the Empress, how many more days can he live? Suyu Rong seemed to have figured out a very important matter. She calmly said, "In the end, that is his own fate, so it should operate according to his thoughts. I wanted to separate him from this world, but he insisted on going back. The heavenly Tao wants him to die, so he prefers to live where death is." Living toward death? Do you still remember Divine General Hanqing? I remember. His Majesty Taizong once said that those who face death to live will find it very difficult to die. Qin Changsheng didn't consider the issue of life and death. He had already disregarded life and death. He left the palace and came to a very secret place, or rather a very ordinary place, the plum garden in outside the Mausoleum of Books. He had lived here for quite a period of time, and it was here that he truly became acquainted with Tang 36. This was very meaningful to him. It was the beginning of his life in the capital. Now that he had returned to this place, he first considered that no one would expect him to come here, and secondly, he wanted the last part of his life in the capital to begin here. He did not know that not long after he left the imperial palace, a small bamboo carriage drove out of the imperial palace. Su Yorong was in that carriage. He also did not know that his senior brother Yurin was currently reading under the starlight in the mausoleum of books across the river. On this night, the two most important people in his life were once very close to him. However, he didn't know at that time. His mind and spirit were all on his own body, the medicinal pills and magic tools that he carried with him, the various cultivation methods in his sea of consciousness, and the countless swords in his scabbard. He sat under a tree in the small courtyard, beginning to sort out his cultivation situation under the starlight. Because his meridians had been completely shattered, his output of true essence was even weaker than it was 2 years ago, even weaker than a normal meditation realm cultivator. However, the star radiance scattered through his flesh and blood was like the snow on the mountains and rivers. It seemed to be scattered here and there, but in reality it was an enormous amount. Moreover, although he had encountered a problem in breaking into star condensation in Mount Han, it could not be said to have been a complete failure. On the surface, his cultivation was still at the peak of ethereal opening. But if he did not care about his meridians being shattered once more and endangering his life, he could condense starlight into a domain in a very short amount of time. In other words, if he did not care about his life, he could be an initial level star condensation expert with an enormous amount of true essence for a short amount of time. He also knew countless sword styles, movement techniques, and Taoist techniques. After entering the upper level of ethereal opening, the vast majority of the opponents he encountered were already star condensation experts. The simplified Yesher step that had helped him many times before was no longer of much use. The increase in speed brought about by the footwork was very small compared to his own speed. Similarly, ordinary sword styles like the 100-flower sword and the Big Dipper sword might occasionally be of some use in battles of the same level. But in tonight's battle, they were useless and could be removed. He calmed his heart and cleared his mind, removing those miscellaneous and imperfect sword styles and Taoist techniques, leaving only the hardest, sharpest, and most powerful techniques in his sea of consciousness. The wind and rain sword of Mount Zhong, the true sword of the orthodoxy, the toppling mountain staff, the sword of hithering light, the 3 forms of Winshu-A, the burning heaven sword, the army-shattering sword, and the 3 swords that Suli had taught him, the blazing sword, the intellectual sword, and the stupid sword. These were Chun Chongqing's most powerful techniques at the moment. To a true expert of the path of the sword, a sword style might not be high or low, but there was definitely a difference in size. The sword styles that Chun Chongqing was most skilled in were all large swords, especially the 3 swords that Suli had taught him. No matter how flexible they were, their auras were enormous. Large swords, or in other words, great techniques, consumed a great deal of spiritual sense and true essence. Chun Chongqing's spiritual sense was extremely stable and powerful, and he also had a large amount of true essence, but output had always been a problem. As a result, he could not endure prolonged battles. In many of his past battles, he would strive to end them in the shortest amount of time possible. Only in the last battle of the Grand Examination and in the chaotic battle around Shunong City would he be forced into a bitter battle. And in reality, he had fought extremely bitterly. Quite a few times, he had almost lost to his opponent's sword. Tonight, he had not yet recovered from his heavy injuries and had to forcefully mobilize his true essence to attack. He could not fall into this sort of situation, so he had to succeed in one strike. He opened his eyes and gazed up at the numerous stars in the night sky, beginning to calculate. That person did not come from a poor background. His birth mother was the concubine of the previous assistant minister of rights, and his childhood did not have any unbearably painful experiences. He did not lack food and clothing, nor was he humiliated by his first mother. Although the imperial examinations could not be said to have gone particularly smoothly, they were also not special. That person's personality was extremely callous and cruel, his strength extremely terrifying, and his spiritual sense exceptionally powerful. It was as if he had gathered the resentment and boundless pain of millions of people. He had experienced it before, and it truly was not something that an ordinary person could resist. Countless materials and information appeared in his sea of consciousness. They were like the stars in the night sky, too numerous to be counted. They seemed to be put together in a disorderly manner, and it was impossible to analyze anything useful from them. However, there was a connection between the stars. Countless invisible lines formed a star map, and there was naturally a hidden meaning in it. After some time, he stood up and walked out of the Plum Garden Inn. The stainless sword still quietly rested in the vault sheath, but he had already unsheathed it. The bamboo carriage followed the official road south. The black goat in front of the carriage was probably unaware of the turbulence in the capital. It was just that it had stayed in the imperial palace for too long and wanted to go out for a stroll. It did not find the autumn trees on the side of the road fresh, but it was rather interested in the dewdrops that had just formed on the grass. Walking and stopping like this did not seem fast, but in the time it took to make a cup of tea, the carriage had already passed Mount Shao. Based on the time, it should be able to reach Holy Maiden Peak by noon. The Tianhai Divine Empress's gaze followed Mount Shao eastward, arriving at the plain at the end of the mountain. In the center of the plain was a large city, its walls extremely thick and lofty. Just from looking at it, it was even more majestic and magnificent than the capital. It was the famous capital of the world, Luoyang. In the Eternal Joy Square, the best location in Luoyang, there was a princely estate that occupied an extremely exaggerated area and was unimaginably extravagant. The Prince of Xiang, the Prince of Tai, quite a few of her nominal sons, and a few of her grandsons were currently embracing singers and indulging in their desires. She did not know if they were doing this for her or her subordinates to see, but she did not care. She drew back her gaze to the capital. She saw the old man watering the plants in the Li Palace, saw her relatives in the estate, saw the candles in the little orange garden that had not yet burned out, saw the snow under New North Bridge, saw the crabapple tree in the alley of the Northern Military Department, and saw the young man holding an umbrella as he walked in that direction. She stood on the dew platform, the entire world beneath her feet. In her eyes, she did not see that person. 10 some years ago, she believed that person to be dead, but she did not expect that person to survive. From the day this fact was confirmed, a crack appeared between her and the Pope. Other than the two of them, the entire world was completely unaware of it. The storm in the capital was as docile as it had been in the past 10 some years, but it was still not the same as it was in the past. She was keenly aware that the reason that person had Chen Chongqing come to the capital was to intentionally leak the news, to make her and the Pope wary of each other. However, she could only accept it because time could not be reversed. After all, the incident in the Orthodox Academy had occurred, and the Pope could not possibly believe that she had no objections to it. From the first time they met in the 100 Herb Garden, she had disliked that person, even loathed him, and did not think much of him. Only when she knew that he was not only Shang Xingzhou, but also Taoist Ji, did she begin to view him seriously. There were some things that she could not understand at the time, but she finally had an answer. The name Shang Xingzhou represented the orthodoxy of the orthodoxy and those old friends who opposed her. The name Taoist Ji represented Emperor Taizong's will, or perhaps his dying will. This was the true reason for her wariness. Chapter 619. Over the countless years, she had seen many heroes high-spirited, cultured, and refined, caring for the world, bemoaning the state of the universe and pitying the fate of mankind. She had seen countless geniuses and experts, those who thought themselves supreme, those who mingled with the light, those who shared the Kong bed with their wives and children. Of these people, only that man had ever made her feel fear. Even though she had already caught up to his cultivation level, even though she would often reveal an expression of ridicule and disdain when she mentioned that man, she had to admit that even today, that man's name still made her feel a tinge of fear. Perhaps it was because when she first faced that man, she was just an innocent, lively, and adorable little girl, completely ignorant of the ways of the world, while he was the supreme expert of the world, still alive but already destined to be recorded in the annals of history as the sovereign father of all emperors? His Majesty Taizong, you've already been dead for so many years. Are you still not willing to rest in peace? She raised her head to the starry sky, gazing at the place where the brightest star had once stood many years ago. After a very long silence, she creased her brow. This early autumn night was truly very long. It was very easy to think of old friends. When the Tian High Divine Empress was thinking of Emperor Taizong, Zhou Tong was also thinking of that one-time principal of the Orthodox Academy, Shang Xingzhou. Zhou Tong was a pure evil person. He enjoyed the pain of his enemies and even his friends, though besides Xue Xingchuan he had no true friends. But this did not mean that he was crazy or that there was something wrong with his head. On the contrary, he was more clear-headed and rational than the vast majority of people, and this was true evil. If he wanted to continue this beautiful life, he needed to protect his own position, needed to ensure that the Divine Empress's imperial throne could not be shaken. It now seemed that the person most likely to shake the Empress's imperial throne was naturally Qin Changsheng. Perhaps in a few days he would die, but Zhou Tong would not take this risk. He would just silently wait. This was a problem that Shang Xingzhou, the imperial clan, and countless other great powers had posed. He felt that he had already found the method to solve this problem, but he first had to find this problem. As he pondered how to solve this problem, his admiration for Shang Xingzhou deepened, and ultimately he even felt reverence. This world was the world of the strong. One person could control a storm. One saint could shake the world. Shang Xingzhou was fully deserving of his title as an expert of the orthodox line of the orthodoxy. Although his reputation was not prominent and he did not enter the ranks of the storms, anyone could clearly see that he had assuredly stepped into the divine domain long ago, his strength unfathomable. However, what truly made Zhou Tong revere him was his deep plans and farsightedness. He had raised Qin Changxing in Xining Village's old temple for 15 years. Without teaching him anything, he directly sent him to the capital and then wrote a letter to the Pope. He was still alive. This should have been the favor the Pope had shown him back then, but now it had become his weapon. As for the relationship between fellow disciples of the orthodoxy, it was naturally also a weapon. As for Mei Li Sha, as a representative of the orthodoxy's conservative faction, an old man who wholeheartedly wanted to assist the imperial clan in regaining the throne, perhaps he had long since known of Qin Changsheng's identity. Thus he had been in such a rush, even somewhat like pulling up a seedling to help it grow. In a short span of 2 years, Qin Changsheng had become the successor to the orthodoxy. In this way, when the Divine Empress wanted to kill Qin Changsheng, the orthodoxy would assuredly protect Qin Changsheng, and the alliance that was not so firm in the first place would naturally collapse. The Divine Empress would lose her greatest supporter, and the Chen imperial clan would naturally have hope of regaining the throne. Just the unremarkable matter of sending Qin Changxing to the capital had shattered the nearly 20 years of peace of the great Zhou dynasty. It was said that the saint treated the world as a chessboard, placing a piece without regret. But Shang Xingzhou dared to use the saint as a chess piece, to use the legacy of the orthodoxy as a method. As for emotions, experiences, and the hearts of people, these things were all at his fingertips, easily discarded. He truly was an extraordinary schemer. Of course, Zhou Tong had deduced all of this because he was also a schemer. The more he admired Shang Xingzhou, the more he regretted that he had not killed Qin Changxing earlier. What I want is not the process, but the result. He stood on the stone steps and gazed at his subordinates, kneeling in the courtyard. Smiling, he said, "I don't care how you analyze and judge. I want to see him die." He was not a pervert, so whether it was when he was executing or abusing ministers, he would not deliberately pretend to be quiet and refined, nor would he wear a shy smile on his lips. When he smiled, it was usually because he felt that the development of the matter made him speechless. So speechless that he could only bitterly smile, just like now. That's a living person, and a famous one at that. Crucially, he's also a sick person, but in the end, none of you can find where he is? Zhou Tong gazed at his subordinates in the courtyard, but he did not finish speaking. Only he knew that Chen Changsheng was a person about to die. Whether he was a famous person, a sick person, or a person about to die, in the end, they were all people that were very easy to find. The Department for Purging officials had several thousand spies and even more informers, but even after spending half the night, they had still not been able to find this person. Zhou Tong truly couldn't help but want to laugh at this. Seeing the smile on their lord's face, not a single official of the Department for Purging officials in the courtyard felt relaxed, and there was certainly no one foolish enough to try and laugh along with him. The officials all had very pale complexions, their black hats unable to block out the starlight descending from the sky, making them seem particularly dismal. Zhou Tong gazed at the official kneeling at the very front, his smile fading as he calmly said, "The imperial court gives you the highest salary, so I naturally have the highest expectations of you." This official was a high official of the Department for Purging officials who specialized in intelligence. Normally, he could enter and leave the various ministries and the halls of the orthodoxy without restriction, so he was deeply revered. But now that his immediate superior had so indifferently mentioned his name, his body could not help but fiercely tremble. With high expectations came great disappointment. He knew that he had to do something, or else Lord Zhou Tong would assuredly use some other method to make him remember tonight's defeat. There was a crisp crack. It was the sound of a finger breaking. He had forcibly snapped off the pinky of his left hand, his face even paler, faintly showing signs of pain. His voice also began to tremble. "This lowly official is incapable. Your Excellency, please give me another hour. I will definitely find that person." Zhou Tong gazed at this official, his expression unchanged. On the side, Cheng Jun frowned. In his view, just breaking off a pinky was far from a resolution. If it were one of his direct subordinates in the Redcoat Cavalry, he would definitely request that they cut off one of his arms. In Cheng Jun's view, this broken finger made Lord Zhou Tong seem too merciful, but in the eyes of the officials of the Department for Purging officials in the courtyard, this was already an extremely clear and terrifying warning. The officials dispersed from the small courtyard, leading their subordinates as they once more began their search in the darkness of the capital. Their movements and mood were even faster and more tense than before. Using half the night without finding a single clue means that the other party has the ability to conceal his tracks. After all, he is the future pope. Cheng Jun followed Zhou Tong back into the room and very respectfully poured a cup of tea for him. Suppressing his voice, he said, "In my view, rather than aimlessly searching like this, it's better to first figure out where he's going after leaving the Orthodox Academy, and then we can go there in advance to set up a trap." This small courtyard in the alley of the Northern Military Department had countless precious tea leaves prepared, but Zhou Tong had always only drunk one kind, the great crimson gown from the south. At this moment, the pot was steeping the great crimson gown, but because there wasn't enough time, the color of the tea poured into the cup was somewhat fainter. Zhou Tong gazed at the rippling color of the tea in the cup and said, "If we could guess where he was going, the Li Palace wouldn't be in such a rush." A sinister smile appeared on Cheng Jun's face. "Then we'll just force him to show himself." Zhou Tong's gaze was still fixed on the teacup, as if he stared long enough, he would be able to see the color of the tea in the cup thicken. His expression did not change at Cheng Jun's words. With a faint "Oh," he asked, "How do we force him?" As the most arrogant member of the Orthodox Eight Tigers, Cheng Jun's methods were always simple and crude. Even if he wants to distance himself from this storm in the capital, he still has people he cares about. Cheng Jun clenched his teeth and said, "Let's go capture a few students of the Orthodox Academy and a few peddlers of 100 Flowers Lane." Chop off their hands and feet and throw them on Vermilion Bird Street. I don't believe that he won't get wind of it." Zhou Tong suddenly smiled, as if the color of the tea in the cup had really thickened. The rich and fragrant great crimson gown looked like blood. Bloody and crude did not mean that it was ineffective. Zhou Tong glanced out the door. His subordinates understood and stealthily entered the darkness. He was confident that it wouldn't take long for this seemingly insane idea to spread throughout the capital, and it would also reach Qin Changxing's ears. Did you ever think that this represents an official declaration of war with the Li Palace? Back when Qin Changxing came to my place to ask for people, the Orthodoxy's cavalry had me surrounded. Zhou Tong smiled at Cheng Jun, his smile containing an extremely deep meaning. Cheng Jun knew that his opponent wanted to know the degree of his resolve. He had thought things through very clearly. He was just like Zhou Tong. If the divine empress lost power, only death awaited him. Thus, tonight he had personally come to the alley of the Northern Military Department. Disregarding his usual vigilance, he had placed all the redcoat cavalry under the command of the department for purging officials. He looked at Zhou Tong, maintaining a humble attitude, yet filled with a sense of heroism. In a shrill voice, he said, "It's already either one of us lives or the other of us lives. We can't yield another step." No one could have imagined that Qin Changxing had already returned to the Orthodox Academy. To put it more accurately, he had returned to that alley outside the Orthodox Academy. He had no idea of the bloody plan that the Department for Purging officials had just drawn up. He had not come to 100 Flowers Lane to prevent Zhou Tong from going crazy and attacking the students of the Orthodox Academy or the surrounding peddlers. He had something else to do. He stood in the shadows of 100 Flowers Lane, watching those indistinct figures, those of the imperial court and the Li Palace, before finally resting his gaze on that carriage at the end of the street. In the autumn of last year, the Tianhai clan and the Orthodoxy's new faction, in order to suppress the Orthodox Academy, had used the all-school martial exhibition proposal to send many experts to challenge it. It was a very interesting story. At that time, he had noticed that carriage at the end of the street. Every time there was a match, that carriage would assuredly appear. This carriage made no effort to conceal its identity, so everyone knew that it came from the Department for Purging officials. Just knowing was not enough. Xiaxiu had specially investigated this carriage, and all the information he had found was now in his mind. The alley of the Northern Military Department was not narrow. In truth, it was a straight street that could accommodate 2 carriages running side by side. The office of the Department for Purging officials was also very large. Besides the sinister prison, there were also countless buildings. That famous small courtyard with blooming crabapples was in its deepest depths. It required a very long time to get from the outside of the office to this place, passing through countless inspections. The carriage that had returned from the Orthodox Academy drove straight into the Yamen. Following the pebbled path inside, it passed the inspection and continued forward. Those fierce and terrifying 3-headed black hounds did not display any abnormalities. Finally, they arrived outside the small courtyard. It was late at night, but many people in the capital were unable to sleep, and the people in the small courtyard were no exception. Zhou Tong and Qing Jun were currently sitting opposite each other, drinking tea. It was unknown if they could taste the true flavor of the tea. As the announcement came from outside the courtyard, Cheng Jun's mind somewhat roused. This carriage had brought back the latest news on the Orthodox Academy. He was very concerned about this matter. The courtyard gate was pushed open. Footsteps could be heard and then stopped. Presumably, the official had already stopped and was standing on the ground of the small courtyard. Qing Jun turned his head to glance at the courtyard. He realized that the official had his head slightly lowered and had no intention of reporting. He couldn't help but slightly frown. As an important minister of the imperial court, his reputation was extremely terrible, but his abilities were actually not bad. He was extremely strict with his subordinates. If it were a red-coat cavalry officer reporting to him so lazily, he would definitely have already thrown the teacup in his hand at them, not allowing them to dodge. But this was the alley of the Northern Military Department, not his territory. He seemed crude and ruthless, but he was actually very intelligent. He would never discipline his subordinates in front of Lord Zhou Tong. Just like before, he felt that the punishment of that official of the department for purging officials breaking his pinky finger was too light, so he said nothing. He also maintained his calm, but in the next moment he found it impossible to maintain his calm, because the official in the courtyard had raised his head. It was a very young face. Qing Jun stood up in shock. Zhou Tong turned to look at the courtyard, his pupils constricting as a chill suddenly arose. Chun Changsheng. The person who had come was Chun Changsheng. The entire capital was searching for him. After searching for him for an entire night, not a single person knew of his whereabouts. The assassins and killers of the department for purging officials were searching everywhere for him. But he had appeared in the department for purging officials. What did he want to do? Zhou Tong calmly gazed at the young man in the courtyard. Without a word, he slowly put down the teacup in his hand. The great crimson gown in the teacup had been steeped for some time, the color of the soup as thick as blood and dazzling to the eyes. Chun Changsheng calmly gazed at him, his right hand rising, gripping the hilt of his sword in the autumn wind at his waist. In this long autumn night, Zhou Tong had been searching for him, wanting to kill him. Little did he know that he was also searching for Zhou Tong, wanting to kill him. Chapter 620. Chun Changsheng stood in the courtyard, gazing at the two people in the room. He had only met Zhou Tong a few times and was not familiar with him. He did not even recognize the other person, but there were not many people that could sit and drink tea with Zhou Tong in the middle of the night. He could roughly guess at that person's identity, so he had a reason to die. He had come to kill Zhou Tong because he was about to die. Before death, one had to do a few things that followed one's heart. This could be called one's final madness, and it could also be called a firework before the curtain fell. He was the successor to the orthodoxy. Actively or passively, he had many enemies and opponents, but there were truly not many people that he wanted to kill. He had no enemies. There were no demons in the capital. Liang Xiaoxiao had committed suicide. Zhuang Huanyu had committed suicide, so only Zhou Tong was left. Zhixiu had been imprisoned in Zhou prison for a very long time and tortured to a state too horrible to look at. When he saw the wounds on Zhixiu's body in the carriage, he had secretly resolved to kill Zhou Tong. Everyone in the Orthodox Academy knew that Zhixiu had stayed in the capital to do this. Chun Changsheng had decided to do this for him, because Zhou Tong had tortured Zhixiu precisely because of his relationship with the Orthodox Academy. Besides this, there were many other reasons to kill Zhou Tong, but there was no need to mention them. In the end, it was just a wish. Chun Changsheng just wanted a person like Zhou Tong to die. In this world, countless people wanted Zhou Tong to die. They had wanted this for many years, but not many people dared to do it. Chun Changsheng dared. According to Zhixiu's plan, he had snuck under the carriage and smoothly passed through several inspections. He had relied on his special physique to hide from those sinister and terrifying Cerberuses and had not triggered the array of Zhou prison. Finally, he had succeeded in arriving at this small courtyard and standing in front of Zhou Tong. But could he kill him? Zhou Tong's terror did not merely lie in his personality and methods. In the last few years, he had raided the manors of countless princes and dukes, obtained countless techniques and secret manuals, and had long since entered the upper level of star condensation. There were even rumors that he had cultivated to the peak of star condensation. The great Crimson Gown's secret mental technique was sinister and terrifying to the extreme. In the years before the Divine Empress had ascended to the throne, the experts dispatched by the imperial clan and those people with lofty ideals who swore vengeance for the innocents who had died miserable deaths in Zhou prison had attempted to assassinate him countless times, but he was still alive and well. The facts of the last few years had long since proved that no one could kill Zhou Tong. No matter how astonishing Chen Chongqing's talent in cultivation was, he was still too young, and his cultivation was only at the peak of ethereal opening. Moreover, after failing to break through on Mount Han, his injuries had not yet healed. So what gave him the confidence to charge here and kill Zhou Tong? Qing Jun looked at the young man in the courtyard and thought about these things. Chen Chongsheng was also thinking about these things. They were all mental activities, silent and unmoving. As he thought of these things, Chen Chongsheng's movements did not stop. He unsheathed the stainless sword and reversed its sheath. Back in Xuanyang City, when confronting Zhu Luo, Wang had done this, and he had also done this. The short sword grew longer and sharper. It was like a spear in his hand, ready to face the battlefield. This showed that he was very cautious and very determined. He looked at Zhou Tong. He didn't even glance at the person next to Zhou Tong. He didn't know that this person was the leader of the Redcoat Cavalry, Cheng Jun, also a middle-level star condensation expert. This was not contempt, this was disregard. The person he wanted to kill was Zhou Tong. Anyone who blocked his sword had to die, no matter who or how strong. Qing Jun sensed that killing intent. He had never imagined that on such a young, even somewhat inexperienced face, he could see such a calm and firm will. And he had never imagined that in this small courtyard of the department for purging officials, there would actually be someone who dared to release such a certain killing intent towards Zhou Tong. This killing intent was not directed at him, but he was right next to Zhou Tong, even a little closer to Chen Chongqing than Zhou Tong. As a result, his face instantly paled, not because of fear, but because of wariness, because of the heaviness of his heart, and also because he took a deep breath. He was originally one of the few middle-level star condensation experts of the capital. At this moment, his true essence exploded, and as he breathed, the crabapple trees in the courtyard madly swayed despite the lack of wind. Countless strands of the night wind were sucked into his lungs. His abdomen slightly bulged like a war drum. A shrill cry, like the cry of an eagle, burst from his lips. This shrill cry instantly tore through the night sky, spreading throughout all of Zhou prison, perhaps even to every corner of the capital. Qing Jun felt that he should not be afraid of Chen Chongsheng, even if he was the future pope. This was because Chen Chongsheng was too young. His cultivation level was already inconceivably high among his peers, but it was still far inferior to Qing Jun's. Moreover, the injuries in his body had probably not healed, but he was very afraid of death. As the leader of the great Zhou dynasty's Redcoat Cavalry, he had colluded with Zhou Tong in the last few years, carrying out the Empress's decree or falsely using the Empress's decree to kill countless nobles and ministers, scholars and priests, wealthy merchants and celebrities, and innocent commoners. He had seen far too many dead people, so he grew more and more afraid of death. Moreover, he was a very intelligent person who understood his own position and would never look down on any opponent. Everyone said that Chen Chongsheng had failed at star condensation in Mount Han, but he was still the future pope, a true genius. Qing Jun felt that no matter how much importance he placed on this young man, it was not excessive. Thus, he immediately chose to shriek and move the capital. With the shriek, Chen Chongsheng moved. Before the sound of his footsteps could even be heard, they were torn apart by the crushed stone tiles beneath his boots, and then pierced through by the flying gravel, leaving behind only a few buzzing sounds. His body suddenly became illusory. With a howl of wind, he shot up the stone steps like an arrow, the sword in his hand thrusting straight forward. Swish! The sound of this sword was extremely pure, without the slightest noise, seeming especially clean, because his sword had just thrusted straight forward, without the slightest deviation or variation. To put it another way, this sword of his had no technique. Chen Chongqing's swordplay had been inherited from Su Li, but it had its own style. After the stormy battle in Xuanyang City, especially the several dozen sword battles in front of the Orthodox Academy last autumn, and his battle with Su Yurong on the Bridge of Helplessness, The entire continent had no choice but to admit that his talent in the path of the sword had already reached a world-shaking level. If not for the fact that he was too young, he would even have the right to be called a grandmaster of the path of the sword. But tonight, when he came to assassinate Zhou Tong, his first sword was actually so simple, without any sword technique to speak of. It was just that it was incomparably straight, incomparably swift. It was like a straight line had been drawn between the lights of the courtyard and the room, and at the end of this straight line was Zhou Tong. At this moment, Cheng Jun was still standing in this line. Chen Changxing's sword was very fast, very sharp, but to a middle-level star condensation expert like him, it was not difficult to deal with. He could rely on his movement techniques to temporarily dodge and then seize the opportunity to counterattack. Of course, the simplest method was to use his star domain to forcefully receive it. But Cheng Jun chose to dodge without the slightest hesitation, because the will of Chen Changxing's sword was too powerful, its edge too brilliant. The dim yellow light in the room suddenly dimmed. Cheng Jun's body was like a wisp of black smoke, drifting to the right, avoiding the sword. His face was somewhat pale, his expression somewhat panicked. This was precisely the scene that Chen Changxing wanted to see the most. He had never imagined that this sword could stab this person to death. This sword of his had never been aimed at this person. He did not know this person's name, so he did not mind casually stabbing this person to death. However, this was a sword that was filled with his mind and will. Landing it on this person's body was a complete waste. His sword had to land on Zhou Tong's body. Perhaps it was because the sword light was too bright, but the dim light in the room suddenly became much brighter. Seeing the sword coming at him, Zhou Tong's face also paled, not out of fear or unease, but out of disdain and anger. He was keenly aware that this seemingly simple sword of Chen Changxing's was actually not simple at all. Countless transformations were concealed behind it. Those transformations were assuredly extremely exquisite and complex, containing all of Chen Changxing's comprehension of the path of the sword. Not even he could see them clearly in advance. But he was not afraid, not even worried. He remained calm, composed, and confident, because the difference in cultivation between him and Chen Changxing was too great. No matter how inconceivable Chen Changxing's cultivation in the path of the sword was, it could not make up for this. He simply would not compete with Chen Changxing on the path of the sword. He simply would not give Chen Changxing the chance to display the sword energy concealed in this straight sword and the subsequent sword techniques. He directly chose to use his unfathomable cultivation to crush his opponent into a ghost in a sea of blood. A clear clang resounded through the room. It was the sound of Zhou Tong's pale fingers tapping on the teacup, the porcelain teacup, and the fingertips that had dug out who knew how many eyes met. But the sound it produced was so clear and bright. The tea in the cup began to ripple. The tea was a tribute from the south, the best great crimson pow. Tonight, this tea had already been brewed for too long. It was a little excessive, the color of the tea, extremely red, just like blood. When the tea swayed, the sea of blood rippled. The light in the room suddenly turned red. A sea of blood appeared in the room. The table, the teapot, and the teacup were all swallowed by the sea of blood. The pungent smell of blood, along with the roiling of the sea of blood, spread in all directions. Even the green leaves of the crabapple tree outside the courtyard had turned red, as if they had been watered by blood for countless years. In this world of blood, Zhou Tong's pale face seemed especially dazzling and abnormally terrifying. In the blink of an eye, his spiritual sense had already enveloped the world in a circumference of several hundred zhang, turning the real world into a sea of blood. This sea of blood constantly soaked into the red official's robe on his body, causing the color of the official's robe to grow deeper and deeper, causing one to feel nauseous upon seeing it. Within the sea of blood, there seemed to be countless vengeful spirits wailing and cursing for help. Chen Changxing's sword was still 3 feet away from Zhou Tong, but these voices had already entered his ears. At the same time he heard these cries of pain, a powerful and terrifying chi, brimming with killing intent and pain, directly invaded his sea of consciousness. This was Zhou Tong's most terrifying secret mental technique. Great Crimson Pow. Everything has already been decided. Everything has already been decided. I never fight a battle unprepared. Chapter 6:21. Last autumn, on the first day of the all-school martial exhibition, Chen Chongsheng broke through Zhou Ziheng's star domain in front of the Tradition Academy's gate. Using the unfinished sword momentum, he brought Tang 36 and Xian Yuan Pa and drove a long carriage straight into the alley of the Northern Military Department. They arrived at the courtyard where the begonia flowers had fallen and directly asked Zhou Tong to let them go. At the time, Zhou Tong had looked at them expressionlessly, and they had seen the sea of blood. Regardless of whether it was him or Tang 36, neither of them could endure the mental pressure and pain, almost collapsing. Even after leaving this courtyard for a long time, they still could not forget the fear and terror brought about by that sea of blood. And at that time, Zhou Tong had only released a portion of his pressure, not directly attacking like he was doing now. It must be known that when Zhou Tong used the secret technique of the Great Crimson Gown with all his strength, even if his opponent was an upper-level star condensation expert, probably only an abnormal human like Painted Armor Xiaozhang, who was constantly in a state of madness, would not be affected in any way. Even a person like Liang Wangsun would choose to temporarily guard his mind. Qin Chongsheng was only at the peak of ethereal opening. No matter how stable and powerful his divine sense was, no matter how much improvement he had made in this 1 year, how could he withstand the sea of blood? From the looks of it, either his consciousness would be directly destroyed by Zhou Tong's mental attack, or he would be lucky enough to maintain his consciousness. He had to withdraw his sword and retreat, doing his best to get as far away as possible. To cultivators, Zhou Tong's sea of blood was a sea of bitterness. If they couldn't escape it, then they could only sink into oblivion. But even if he chose to put away his sword and leave, could he really leave this courtyard? No one had expected what happened next. Qin Chongsheng's face was pale, but he didn't choose to escape, nor did he collapse. His body turned from illusory to solid, and his speed became many times slower, but he still held his sword and stabbed forward. He felt as if he was walking in a waist-deep sea of viscous blood. Although it was difficult and slow, he did not stop. Zhou Tong's pupils constricted as he gazed at the bright light that was gradually tearing apart the sea of blood, the bright sword glow coming from the stainless sword. Why was Qin Chongsheng's divine sense so strong? More than 2 years ago, there was only Chen Chongsheng in the Tradition Academy. He chose his fated star in the library. His soul consciousness swaggered up to the 9 heavens, reaching the depths of the sea of stars. At the time, the Divine Empress and Mo.U had a conversation on the dew platform. His divine sense was very strong, but it wasn't exaggerated. What truly stood out was that his expression was very calm. Peace was the only way to achieve greatness. They could travel as far as they wanted. Now, besides being tranquil, his divine sense was even more tenacious. In this 1 year, he had used the 10,000 sword wills in the vault sheath to cleanse his consciousness countless times. His soul consciousness had crossed the ocean of sword intent countless times and touched the black stone tablet on the other side, but he had never lost his way. How could Zhou Tong's sea of blood cause his consciousness to sink into it? He also wore a string of stone pearls on his wrist. There were not many stone pearls, but each one was a heavenly tone monolith. At this moment, these stone pearls were faintly glowing, protecting his Tao heart. Apart from these reasons, the most important one was still himself. His mental state was at the absolute peak of his 17 years of life. He knew he was going to die, and he walked towards it. He faced death to live, and once he calmed down, he was fearless. Very few people could have such an experience. Of course, he believed that no one would want to have such an experience. It could even be said that he had already seen through life and death, at least in these past few days. So he was able to resist Zhou Tong's secret mental attack, able to persevere through the sticky and terrifying sea of blood. At the end, the sword glow finally illuminated the room. The sword energy finally cleaved a path through the sea of blood, arriving in front of Zhou Tong. Zhou Tong's deep and serene eyes were illuminated by the sword glow, a hint of regret faintly visible. He knew that Chen Chongqing's cultivation in the path of the sword was extremely profound, so he did not want to tangle with Chen Chongqing in this aspect. He only wanted to use his most powerful technique to resolve everything in the shortest amount of time possible. So he did not hesitate to allow Chen Chongqing to increase his sword intent, choosing to use a secret mental technique to attack through space. Yet, he had not expected Chen Chongqing's spiritual sense to be so powerful that it could forcibly block the great crimson gown and break through the sea of blood. As a result, that incomparably sharp sword had already arrived in front of him. A sliver of wariness appeared in Zhou Tong's eyes. Even an upper-level star condensation expert could not ignore the sword in Chen Chongqing's hand. From the snowy plains to Xuanyang City, from the capital to Mount Han, from Shuehe to Lianghongzhuang, from Lin Pingyuan to Zhou Ziheng. Far, too many star condensation experts had been defeated by Chen Chongqing's sword. But there was still no fear in Zhou Tong's eyes because he was no ordinary star condensation expert. He was a peak star condensation expert. His cultivation was much higher than Chen Chongqing's. Even if he had a problem with his response and allowed Chen Chongqing's sword to arrive in front of him, he still had nothing to worry about, because the space in front of him was his world. Countless stars began to shine from within the blood-red official's gown. They were not silver, but also the color of blood. The sea of blood that enveloped Zhou Prison suddenly receded like a receding tide, then condensed into a sphere of blood. This sphere of blood was so real, like it had really been condensed from fresh blood. The crabapple tree in the courtyard regained its green color, but as if it had fallen ill, countless leaves began to fall. Countless dried-up insect corpses appeared in the cracks of the stone steps. Zhou Tong's body was immersed in this sphere of blood, an extremely bizarre sight. This sphere of blood was his star domain. This was his world. Zhou Tong's face was very pale, faintly discernible in and out of the blood, sometimes sinking and sometimes floating. The blood began to boil, emitting an unpleasant stench of blood. Anyone who smelled this stench would easily lose their soul and sink into a state of madness until their soul left their body and died. Chang Jun had retreated to the back of the room, so he was not affected. As he watched this sight, his eyes were filled with fear. Chen Chongqing had bathed in dragon blood, and his stainless body had always been special, so he was not affected. He continued to stab at the spear of blood. Zhou Tong's pale face was even more distinct in the mist of blood. He stared at the sword glow, and Chen Chongqing, his eyes indifferent. The star domain of the peak of star condensation could be said to be infinitely close to perfection. There was almost no weak spot, let alone a hole. How could Chen Chongqing's sword break through this sea of blood? The stainless sword was clearly stabbing at Zhou Tong's throat, but no one noticed that in the space above them, a sword glow had appeared. Swish! The sword glow pierced through the sea of blood, stabbing straight at his left eye. Zhou Tong's callous lips emitted a fierce howl as his sleeves swiftly danced. The crimson official's robe incessantly trembled, like the waves of a sea of blood. The immortal birds and monsters drawn on the official's robe seemed to come to life. From the depths of the sea of blood surged an innumerable number of faceless and bodiless, vengeful spirits. With mournful and resentful shrieks, they lunged at the sword image. The bright sword glow easily tore those vengeful spirits to pieces and continued forward, stabbing into Zhou Tong's left shoulder. With a light swish, a jet of blood shot out. The perfect star domain of a peak star condensation expert had actually been broken. Looking at this scene that was completely impossible, Chung Jun's face paled, his body trembled, and he was completely unable to speak. Yes, this was originally something that should not have happened, but when the person wielding the sword was Chen Changsheng, this kind of thing seemed to become understandable. Without the slightest exaggeration, in the countless years from the distant past to the present, he was the one who had used his ethereal opening body to surpass cultivation levels and break through star condensation. This was because in the mausoleum of books he had understood the relationship between the multitude of stars in the sky and the star domain of cultivators. In the wastelands of the north, Su Li had taught him a sword style, giving him a pair of wise eyes that could see through the star domain. The intellectual sword was a sword style or combat method that consumed a great deal of spiritual sense and mental strength. It was a method that Su Li had taught him specifically for breaking through the star domain. The key point of this sword style was to comprehend the relationship between the starry sky and living beings, thereby calculating the holes in a cultivator's star domain. Chen Changxing's experience of comprehending the monoliths in the mausoleum of books was different from others. So, although his calculating abilities were inferior to Su Yorong's and Su Li's, his comprehension of the intellectual sword was not any weaker. Starting from the Plum Garden Inn, he had always been calculating in order to find, or perhaps guess, the weak point of Zhou Tong's sea of blood. His sword had long since been unsheathed, so how could it miss? Blood flew, sword intent exploded, and the temperature in the courtyard rapidly rose. Chen Changxing knew that there was an enormous gap between his and Zhou Tong's true cultivation levels. Once he succeeded, he did not dare to tarry. Using his spiritual sense, he ignited the star radiance and fragments in his body, transforming them into an unimaginable amount of true essence that surged forward through the stainless sword. The stainless sword grew even brighter, exuding a pure and holy white light and heat, as if it would destroy Zhou Tong's life force in the next moment. Yet in the next moment, this scene did not occur. The straight sword had clearly pierced through the sea of blood, stabbed into Zhou Tong's body, but now it seemed to stab into nothingness, as if there was nothing before the edge of the sword. Zhou Tong's true body was actually not in the sea of blood. His crimson official's robe lightly fluttered in the night wind. At some point he had floated into the air above the room, exuding a bloody and terrifying pressure. A ball of blood appeared in the palm of his right hand. Was this his star domain of the sea of blood? The star domain was the most powerful defensive method of star condensation cultivators. It could be said to be their world. Just who could leave their own world and then grasp that world in their hands? Chen Changxing had seen similar records in the Taoist canon, but he had never encountered it in a real battle. This was the first time he had seen such a scene. Zhou Tong had left his own world, transforming the star domain of the sea of blood into a ball of blood in his palm. This also meant that although Chen Changxing had gone through incomparably complicated and arduous calculations to use the intellectual sword to destroy his opponent's star domain, he was already incapable of harming his opponent's body. On the contrary, his sword had entered the sea of blood, which was equivalent to being grasped in Zhou Tong's hand, making it impossible for him to stab forward. Through the feeling transmitted back to him by the edge of the sword, Chen Changxing very quickly confirmed this chilling fact. Zhou Tong looked down at him from above, expressionlessly asking, "This is that sword?" From the moment he decided to kill Chen Changxing, even before last summer, he had begun to collect all the information on Chen Changxing. That carriage had always been parked in 100 Flowers Lane. He knew what Chen Changxing had done in the wilderness and in Xuanyang City. He knew that Su Li had taught him 3 sword styles, and he even knew that the key to one of these sword styles lay in calculation. Since he knew, as the continent's most famous schemer, a powerful figure skilled in scheming, how could he not calculate how Chen Changxing would attack? The sea of blood that he had spread out was real, and the fact that it had been broken by Chen Changxing was also real. His response had been very risky, even though he had already prepared a backup plan. All of this had been for a single goal. He wanted to cripple Chen Chongqing's sword. Chapter 6:22. It was said that Chen Chongqing was a cultivation genius. After many things had happened in the past 2 years, this conclusion had been publicly acknowledged by the entire continent. But in truth, many people did not know which aspect was the strongest. Was it the quantity of true essence or the ability to perceive? Of course, being able to read through the Taoist canon was a very impressive thing, but between the accumulation of knowledge and the ability to fight, some specific methods were needed as a bridge. Only after sending Su Li back 10,000 li to the south, the several dozen sword battles in front of the Orthodox Academy, and the battle on the Bridge of Helplessness, these 3 major events, did the people gradually confirm that Chen Chongqing's strongest aspect was his sword. This caused many people, especially the priests of the Orthodoxy, to feel somewhat surprised and even faintly uneasy. The Orthodoxy naturally also had sword styles, such as the true sword of the Orthodoxy, the Heavenly Tao Academy's sword of Hithering Light, or the Temple sword of the Southern Department. But the Orthodoxy's resources were even more reflected in other aspects. As the successor to the Pope, Wat Chen Chongqing was most skilled in was not the divine arts of the Orthodoxy, nor was it the Taoist techniques of the Taoist canon, but the sword techniques of Mount Lijiutong saw Chen Chongqing even more clearly. He knew that Chen Chongqing's strength lay not only in his talent in the way of the sword, but also in his sword itself. He vaguely knew that Chen Chongqing had had a fortuitous encounter in the sword pool of the Garden of Zhou. He had attempted to send people to find where those famed swords had been hidden, but after more than a year had passed, the spies of the Department for Purging officials who had spread throughout the world had ultimately only found one sword in the latrine of the Orthodox Academy. The other famed swords had all disappeared without a trace, causing him to be very vigilant. What he was even more wary of was the sword placed in front of him, the sword that Chen Chongqing was currently holding in his hand. The stainless sword was the newest divine weapon on the tier of legendary weapons. There was nothing special about this dagger, other than its sharpness. However, just as the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets had said, anything that was unleashed to the extreme would be especially terrifying. This dagger was far too sharp. It could easily pierce through the divine artifact of the Tianhai clan, the 6 Protection's divine armor. Although Zhou Tong was a powerful expert at the peak of star condensation, his body as tough as steel, he did not dare to test the sword with his body. Moreover, he didn't want Chen Chongqing to fully display his sword cultivation. Therefore, the moment he saw Chen Chongqing raise his head in the room, he had already decided on how to deal with him. He spread out his star domain of Blood Sea and waited for Chen Chongqing to break it with his sword. He used an extremely risky and consuming method to forcefully leave his own world and hold the Blood Sea in his hand. Chen Chongqing's sword was in the sea of blood, held in his hand, tightly controlled by the pressure. No matter how sharp that sword was, it could not touch his body and soul. No matter how profound Chen Chongqing's sword path was, there was no room for it to be used. At this point, Chen Chongqing's intellectual swords all fell into the air, and then fell into his calculation. Feeling the boundless power from the edge of the sword, feeling the bloody and terrifying pressure, Chen Chongqing's face became abnormally pale as he raised his eyes to look at the crimson official's robe dancing in the air of the room. The intellectual sword that had been unsheathed at the Plum Garden and had consumed too much of his psyche power and obsession. This was the first time since he started learning swordsmanship in the wilderness that his intellectual sword was completely ineffective. His sword was in the hands of a powerful enemy, and his sword Tao was stuck in the sea of blood, unable to be used. His face paled, perhaps because he had lost too much of his psyche power, or because he had lost his confidence. The stainless sword had been infected by the sea of blood and was no longer as bright as before, making it impossible for him to continue using his own sword technique. However, he still had a sword technique that he could use without needing to move. His spiritual sense fell on the snowy plains outside his ethereal palace. The snowflakes condensed from star radiance, madly danced in the air, and then instantly ignited. In an extremely short period of time, they exploded with boundless light and heat. A powerful chi and a seemingly tangible flame exploded from the edge of the sword, attempting to break through the foul ball of blood in Zhou Tong's palm. A loud boom resounded. A gale howled through the room. Countless rays of light burst out from Zhou Tong's fingers, making it seem like the bones of his fingers could be seen. The pearl of blood wrapped around the dagger trembled uneasily, its surface fiercely heaving up and down. From time to time, a few drops of blood would fly out. When the blood landed on the ground, it would corrode the hard stone floor and hiss. Zhou Tong's expression turned solemn. He knew that Qin Changxing had a sword technique that could greatly increase the output of true essence, but he had not expected that this sword would be so berserk. A harsh howl once more burst out from his thin and stern lips. The night wind howled in from outside the room, causing his crimson official's gown to flap in the wind. An extremely callous and powerful qi appeared. As his crimson official's gown madly danced, Zhou Tong's figure seemed to grow several times larger, bursting through the back half of the room and transforming into a Dharma idol Tensum Zhangtal. Qin Changxing's sword madly surged with light and heat, sword intent and killing intent. Countless bright rays of light and invisible sword intents shot out from Zhou Tong's fingers, cutting away countless pieces of stone from the walls of the room. Yet his sword was still unable to truly break through Zhou Tong's palm, unable to escape from the pearl of blood formed from the star domain of blood. This was the unbridgeable gap between the peak of star condensation and the peak of ethereal opening. No matter how high Qin Changxing's cultivation in the path of the sword was, no matter how sharp the stainless sword was, it still seemed to be helpless. In front of Zhou Tong's Dharma idol that seemed like a demon god, standing on the ground, Qin Changxing seemed so insignificant like an ant. The light and sword intent exuded by the sword in his hand seemed so dim in Zhou Tong's palm, like the light of a firefly that could be extinguished at any moment. Would this assassination on this early autumn night, and just like this, Qin Changxing's approach to death, to live, would ultimately still be helplessly welcoming death? No, although it was just the light of a firefly, as long as there were enough of it, it could still illuminate the night until it finally set the plains ablaze, even the heavens aflame. The blazing sword that Su Li had taught him was drawn from the secret sword of the Golden Crow and used the energy of the burning heaven sword. However, its true energy came from the final move of the Mount Li sword style. The special characteristic of that sword was disregarding life. When Qin Changxing came today to kill Zhou Tong, he had never thought that he would be able to return alive. He was truly approaching death to live, and he had long ago cast aside life and death. He knew that he was about to die, so he was naturally more disregarding life than anyone else. If there really was a so-called heavenly Tao in the starry sky, then it should be able to sense his current mood. If there really was a so-called fate in the starry sky, then his fate was still in his hands. Suddenly, another extremely small firefly appeared, right on his wrist. This firefly grew brighter and brighter, until it became a star. Soon after, many more similar lights appeared on his body, as if stars were being lit up one after another. The places where these stars appeared were all his chi openings. In Mount Han, he had once done something similar. At the time, he had almost died. But in any case, he was already going to die. He had always been prepared to die, so how could he care about these things? He had long since made his preparations to once more light up those chi openings in this courtyard filled with crabapple blossoms, allowing the sea of stars to once more descend upon his body. Star radiance descended from the sky, noiselessly passing through the dilapidated house and falling upon his body, causing those stars on his body to grow even brighter. Countless stars were faintly discernible in the sleeves of his clothes, connecting into lines, connecting into sheets, transforming into a star chart, condensing into a star domain. After Mount Han, Qin Changxing had once more condensed a star Zhou Tong's expression subtly changed. He knew that in Mount Han, Qin Changsheng had been heavily injured precisely because he had attempted to condense a star, but he had never expected that at this moment, Qin Changsheng would once more attempt to condense a star, and that he would actually succeed. The starlight retreated into Qin Changsheng's body, but his qi did not drop. On the contrary, it suddenly rose, blocking the pressure of the sea of blood. The light and heat bursting from the edge of the sword seemed to want to incinerate the sphere of blood in Zhou Tong's palm. And those sword intents were already beginning to show signs of piercing through the sphere of blood. Zhou Tong's complexion paled. The hairband of his black hair snapped and madly danced in the night wind. His qi rose once more, and he forcefully grasped those sword intents in his hand. As long as Qin Changsheng's stainless sword could not break through his star domain of blood, there was no possibility of him losing this battle. If the battle continued like this, with Qin Changsheng's sword restrained and unable to increase its edge, it truly was impossible for him to break through Zhou Tong's sea of blood. Even if he succeeded in condensing his star, he was still only at the initial level of star condensation, still very far from the peak of star condensation. But just because he could not move the stainless sword did not mean that he could not attack, because the sheath of the sword known as the vault sheath still concealed countless swords. With a swish, the space in the room seemed to be cut open. Tensome clear sword slashes appeared on the trunk of the crabapple tree outside the room. An ancient sword flew out from the sheath in his hand. Following the blade of the stainless sword, it stabbed into the sea of blood in Zhou Tong's palm. This sword was called the Yu Maiden Sword, the famed sword that Mo had wanted from him but was unable to obtain. This sword had once slumbered in the sea of grass in the garden of Zhou for several centuries. It had long since rusted and no longer possessed its intimidating luster of the past. But after 2 years of nourishment in the vault sheath, it had already regained its former edge. With a whoosh, the Yu Maiden Sword stabbed into the sea of blood. Soon after, countless swords flew out from the sheath, charging wave after wave at the sea of blood. Over the centuries, the sword pool of the Garden of Zhou had buried more than 10,000 famed swords. Only when Qin Changsheng brought the yellow paper umbrella to the plains did these swords awaken. Together with Qin Changsheng, they battled the monster tide, broke the sole pivot of the mausoleum of Zhou, and then held up the vault of heaven. Finally, they left the Garden of Zhou with him, returning to the world they had left a long time ago. Many famed swords returned to their former sex and sex, like the temple sword or the sword of spiritual light. Some swords encountered lucky chances, like the mountain sea sword and the demon commander's banner sword. Many swords were hidden in various corners of the Orthodox Academy by a certain person, and many swords had always remained by Qin Changsheng's side. There were at least 6,000 of them, as comrades and comrades. Today, Qin Changsheng was about to challenge the most powerful and terrifying enemy of his life. In the face of this most difficult and dangerous situation, how could they be willing to fall behind? The swords all left their sheaths and rushed forward, striving to outdo each other. For a moment, the entire courtyard was suffused with an awe-inspiring sword intent, let alone the crabapple trees. Even the hardstone tiles were marked with countless perfectly straight sword slashes. Chung Jun shrieked in fear. His cultivation suddenly rose, his 2 palms shielding his body like 2 iron plates as he fled to the back of the house. First of all, it's only natural to be in the middle again. This is our old hobby, or perhaps we should say our old shamelessness. Secondly, yesterday little Nan received his marriage certificate. Dan Huai's son is 1 year old. His old comrades are all making new contributions. How can there be no clothes to wear? Wearing the same robe as shrimps. It's rather emotional, reminiscing the past and looking forward to the future. Everything will be better. Choosing heaven's will be even better, and everyone will be even happier. Chapter 6:23. Countless sword glows surged out of the vault sheath and bombarded the sea of blood. Either mournful or muffled sounds of collisions and cutting rang out one after another. Dazzling light illuminated the gloomy courtyard, illuminating the broken walls, the scarred crabapple tree, illuminating the viscous sea of blood, and also illuminating Zhou Tong's pale face. The swords were like countless meteors descending from the heavens, carrying with them a frightening light and heat as they incessantly stabbed at the sea of blood and pressure. Zhou Tong's cultivation was already at the peak of star condensation, so he had long since prepared for Qin Changxing's moves. Qin Changxing's intellectual sword was unable to find a true flaw and was instead suppressed. But how could his star domain endure the bombardment of so many swords? No matter how nearly perfect it was still not true perfection. As long as there was a flaw, it would definitely be pierced through. The sea of blood condensed into a ball of blood, trapping the peerlessly sharp stainless sword within. Under the assault of countless sword glows, it began to show signs of breaking. There was a light clap, like a leather bag filled with wine being pierced by a sharp sword, or like a paper window being lightly pierced by a finger. The sea of blood had been broken. Zhou Tong's face became abnormally pale, his eyes growing increasingly serene, a tinge of fear appearing in their depths. Countless sword glows pierced through the sea of blood, carrying with them an awe-inspiring sword intent as they fell upon his body. Amidst the mournful sounds of swords cutting, countless real streams of blood shot into the darkness, accompanied by a furious and pained howl. In the blink of an eye, Zhou Tong's body was covered in several hundred sword wounds. Blood flowed from these wounds, and one could even faintly make out his awe-inspiring white bones. Zhou Tong knew that Qin Changxing had many swords, and he had also thought that Qin Changxing might have placed his swords in that sheath called the vault sheath. But he could never have imagined that Qin Changxing had the ability to simultaneously control so many swords. It must be known that these swords were all heirlooms that had once enjoyed an illustrious reputation in the world. So how could they be controlled by a youth who had just entered the initial level of star condensation? Blood madly spurted through the courtyard, flowing onto the cracked stone floor, and also flowing into that seemingly illusory sea of blood. The sea of blood was broken, but it did not disperse. On the contrary, as Zhou Tong's true blood flowed in, it became even more berserk, the stench of blood thickening. A hand reached out from the sea of blood, from the darkness. It was Zhou Tong's left hand. There were already countless wounds on his palm, his skin and flesh split open and covered in blood. Even the flesh on his middle and index fingers had been completely sliced off by the sword intent, leaving behind only white bones. It was an abnormally terrifying sight. It was just like the miserable state of the prisoners he often saw in the underground prison of this courtyard. His hand, which was completely broken, trembled slightly in the night wind, as if it could break at any moment, but it still firmly moved forward, reaching towards Qin Changxing's throat. White bones emerged from a sea of blood. Under the bombardment of thousands of sword beams, Zhou Tong was heavily injured, but he did not die on the spot. He still had the ability to fight. He floated in the air, his entire body covered in blood. His red official robe had long been soaked through, dripping blood onto the ground. The front of the red official's robe had already been torn to shreds by the sword intent, revealing what was underneath. It was not his body, but an extremely bright soft armor that faintly exuded a divine aura. On the soft armor, near his chest and abdomen, was a small hole that was extremely difficult to see with the naked eye. Qin Changxing's pupils constricted. He immediately recognized it. It was the supreme treasure of the Tianhai clan, the Six Protections divine armor. The extremely small hole on the Six Protections divine armor had been personally pierced by him last autumn in front of the Orthodox Academy. The stainless sword could break through the Six Protections divine armor, but that did not mean that other famous swords had the same ability. The Six Protections divine armor was the most famous soft armor on the tier of legendary weapons, and it could even be said to have an effect close to that of a divine artifact. It had succeeded in blocking the majority of those several thousand sword glows for Zhou Tong. Why was this divine armor on Zhou Tong's body? That left hand that was like white bones pierced through the darkness and the sea of blood, clawing at Chen Chongsheng's throat. Zhou Tong's sinister and furious voice resounded in Chen Chongsheng's sea of consciousness. Did you think that I would be completely unprepared? The great red official's robe, soaked in blood, madly danced in the tattered courtyard, spraying blood in all directions, as well as anger and hatred. The terrifying pressure of the sea of blood enveloped the area. Those several thousand bright sword glows broke through the sea of blood and soared into the night sky, unable to immediately return. Chen Chongsheng used the Yesher step and continuously retreated. However, the sea of bitterness was difficult to cross, and the sea of blood was no different. No matter how his figure changed and changed, he ultimately still remained where he was, the stainless sword still unable to leave Zhou Tong's hand. With a crack, the white bone hand, dripping with blood, gripped Chen Chongsheng's throat. Even though his body had been bathed in dragon blood, it could not endure the full-strength strike of the sea of blood-bone claw. Chen Chongsheng's throat was completely shattered, but not a single drop of blood leaked out. Zhou Tong stood in front of him, his official's robe reeking of blood, like a wet swamp, making one desire to smell it. Chen Chongsheng's face was very pale, but his eyes were very bright. Zhou Tong's face was very pale, his eyes very serene. This was the closest the two of them had been since the start of the battle, not even a foot apart. Was this the end of this desperate battle? No, Chen Chongsheng did not think so. Zhou Tong also did not think so. Zhou Tong was the person who had killed the most people in the world and had seen the most death, so he was most afraid of death. He did not want to die. He had been cautious his entire life and would not miss a single detail. He did not know that Chen Chongsheng would come to kill him, but in these past few decades, someone could come to kill him at any time, so he was always prepared. Only when Chen Chongsheng appeared in this courtyard once filled with crabapple blossoms did all his caution and preparations show their use. He knew how much ability Chen Chongsheng had, how many fortuitous encounters. He knew of the 3 swords that Su Li had passed on to Chen Chongsheng, knew that Chen Chongsheng had brought out countless swords from the Garden of Zhou. He naturally had the corresponding methods, like the star domain of the sea of blood transforming into a ball of blood in his palm, or the 6 protections divine armor hidden beneath his crimson official's robe. Was this all? No, he knew that Chen Chongsheng still had some trump cards, such as the magical artifacts that Princess Luoluo had bestowed upon him back then, or that Su Li might have left behind some life-saving abilities for him, or that divine staff that the Pope had bestowed upon him. Thus, Chen Chongsheng naturally still concealed a corresponding strongest move. Even though he was heavily injured, his flesh cut to pieces by the sword glows, he still did not use his strongest move, because he had always remembered that divine staff that represented the authority of the orthodoxy, that legendary divine staff that had the power to split the heavens and split the earth. It's already come to this. I'm already gripping your throat with my cruel fate. What are you still waiting for? Zhou Tong's eyes became abnormally deep and serene, shrinking like some monsters, seeming to become a straight line. He knew that in the next moment, Chen Chongsheng would use the orthodoxy's divine staff and deliver his most decisive strike. He was waiting for that moment of light to arrive. Countless sword glows pierced through the sea of blood and into the night sky, but they still had not returned. A bloody hand of white bone gripped Chen Chongsheng's throat. This was the moment he was closest to death, and also the moment Zhou Tong was closest to him. Chen Chongsheng had been waiting for this moment. He had struck, just as Zhou Tong had expected. The moment he struck, there was light. Zhou Tong's face was abnormally pale in the light, but there was no surprise or fear on his face, because everything was within his expectations. The blood-red official's gown glowed with a strange luster under the light. With the dripping of blood, a magical artifact exuding an ancient chi floated out of his sleeve and blocked the light. It was a mirror, its ancient chi tinged with mysteriousness. The surface of the mirror was as smooth as water, as if it could reflect all light. If Chen Changsheng could recognize this copper mirror, he would know that even if this copper mirror could not completely block the light of the orthodoxy's divine staff, it could still buy some time for Zhou Tong. In the shortest amount of time, that bloody hand of bone would be able to wrench his head from his neck. Yet this sort of thing did not happen. The depth in Zhou Tong's eyes was chased away by the light, revealing a tinge of fear. Because the light that had arrived in front of him was not a patch, but a ray. An incomparably bright light flashed through his eyes. Where did this light come from? It was not the sword glow that was rapidly flying back. Similarly, it was not the divine light emitted by the orthodoxy's divine staff. This ray of light was so pure, without the slightest impurity. It was only because of this that it seemed so terrifying. This ray of light was decisive, fierce, and breathtaking. Zhou Tong's eyes were the first to see this ray of light, so his eyelashes snapped. Soon after, a line of blood appeared in his eyes, snapping from the middle. The copper mirror that had floated out of his sleeve had no use at all, snapping from the middle. This fierce blade glow seemed to rise from the night sky and descend from the yellow springs, cleaving at him. An extremely shrill and miserable howl burst forth from his blood-stained lips. The countless magical artifacts he had brought with him all exploded, the courtyard seeming to explode with fireworks, yet they still could not stop the descent of that ray of light. His great red official's gown madly danced in fear. His body transformed into a gloomy shadow, retreating into the depths of the courtyard. But he still could not avoid the descent of this ray of light. The ray of light fell on his body. The laces of the 6 protections' divine armor were severed. His earlobe was severed. His shoulder was severed. His left arm was severed. Before this bright ray of light, everything, even the light emitted by the other sources of light and the night wind, was severed. This ray of light was a blade glow. The blade glow descended. A clear and perfectly straight line of blood appeared on Zhou Tong's face and body, extending from his left eye all the way to his ribs. With a light swish, a flower of blood flew out of his eye. His left cheek was blown away by the wind, his left shoulder was cut off, and his left arm fell to the ground. Only then did he heavily fall to the ground, vomiting a mouthful of blood so thick that it could not be dissolved. What sort of blade was this? Chen Changsheng walked into the ruins, his hand gripping the blade. This was the kitchen knife he had taken from the kitchen before leaving the Orthodox Academy. This was the most terrifying blade in the world, from ancient times until now. Before this blade, mountains and rivers would all be severed in two. Severed in two. Chapter 6:24. Chen Changsheng, shrouded in starlight, walked towards the ruined sea of blood. Through his clothes, it seemed like several hundred stars were faintly discernible. Zhou Tong lay in the ruins of the courtyard, constantly vomiting blood, no longer able to stand up. From the start of the battle, Cheng Jun had been hiding in the shadows, but now that the entire courtyard had been destroyed, there were naturally no shadows, revealing his figure. As the only person to personally witness this battle, the leader of the great Zhou dynasty's redcoat cavalry had been in a daze for a very long time. Chen Changsheng had actually won. A heavily injured youth had actually defeated the peak star condensation Lord Zhou Tong in a direct battle. In this battle, the power Chen Changsheng had displayed had completely surpassed his imagination. No, surpassed the imagination of the entire world. At this time, Chen Changsheng had already walked up to the ruins, his face pale and on the verge of collapse. In this desperate battle, he had obtained the final victory, but he had also paid an unimaginable price. The true essence in his body had already been completely consumed. Even more frightening was that the price of forcefully breaking into star condensation had caused the meridians in his body to rupture once more. That blood, which contained boundless life energy and danger, was currently flowing through his internal organs. A harsh light suddenly flashed through Cheng Jun's eyes. In this battle, Chen Chongqing had displayed an unimaginable strength. Even now, he still could not understand just what that dazzling and violent blade glow was. But it was obvious that Chen Chongqing was on the verge of collapse and should not have the ability to continue fighting, so he wanted to gamble. His right hand rose in the wind and hung by his waist. At any time, he could take out his magical artifact and prepare to launch a sneak attack. Just at this moment, Chen Chongqing turned his head to glance at him. His gaze fell, his spiritual sense fell, and his mind moved. Above the ruins of the courtyard, countless mournful cries of swords resounded through the night sky. Soon after, countless sword glows descended from the sky. The several thousand sword glows that had left their sheaths to destroy Zhou Tong's star domain of blood followed Chen Chongqing's will and returned to the human world. An awe-inspiring sword intent enveloped the battlefield. The cries of swords ceased, and what followed was a very soft, piercing sound, like a piece of cloth being pierced. Cheng Jun lowered his head and saw that a bloody hole had appeared in his chest. Soon after, even more sword glows pierced through his body. More and more bloody holes appeared on his body. Thousands of sword lights, thousands of bloody holes. They were so densely packed that his body was covered in holes, and blood was spurting out everywhere. Because there were too many sword holes, the blood flowed out in an instant. The dim light at the back of the courtyard shone through those holes, making his body look like a unique lampshade. Cheng Jun raised his head and glanced at Chen Chongqing blankly. Then his body suddenly loosened and became a pile of flesh on the ground. Only his head remained relatively intact. Thousands of sword flashes passed through his body, swept across the courtyard, and then returned to Chen Chongqing's sheath. The two crabapple trees were reduced to wood shavings and leaves in the night wind. Dozens of houses with the courtyard as the center were all cut into ruins. Just like how shocked and confused Cheng Jun was, even if Chen Chongqing forcefully broke into star condensation, logically speaking, he should not have been able to defeat a powerful expert on the level of Zhou Tong. But in reality, no one had ever seen his true strength. No one knew how strong he would be if he went all out. Su Yurong had a rough understanding, but she had never seen it with her own eyes. Zhou Tong only knew that he had many famous swords passed down through the ages and that he had learned the sword from Su Li. But he did not know that he had also practiced Wang Po's blade intent, much less that he had learned Zhou Dufu's having blade style. He knew that he carried the orthodoxy's divine staff, but he did not know that Su Li had left a letter in his bosom and that there were 5 heavenly tome monoliths on his wrist. Tonight's battle was the first time that Chen Chongqing had completely displayed his strength. No, even at the very end, he had not used all of his techniques because there was no need. Chen Chongqing had used what Zhou Tong knew about him and what he did not know to perfectly design tonight's battle and obtain the final victory. Back when they had returned south from the snowy plains, Su Li had taught him many things on the road. Marching armies and fighting battles, strategizing, he had used them all tonight. This was the true intellectual sword. From start to finish, all the details had been in his grasp. Of course, the key to his victory over Zhou Tong was still that final blade. In that blade, he had used Zhou Dufu's blade style, but he had borrowed Wang Po's blade intent. Wang Po's blade intent was straight, a blade that went straight to the point. Chen Chongqing did not know how a person should live their lives, but he knew that before he died, what he wanted to do the most was kill Zhou Tong. So he had come to the alley of the Northern Military Department and gone straight to the point. If he wanted to kill Zhou Tong, he could kill Zhou Tong. As he gazed at Zhou Tong lying in a pool of blood in the ruins, Chen Chongqing did not think about those famous ministers and great generals and innocent commoners who had died tragically in Zhou prison. He did not think about the dreadful torture that Jishio had once suffered in this place. Without thinking about anything, he let go of the kitchen knife, gripped the stainless sword in the wind, and walked forward. He only needed to take 2 steps forward. The sword would fall, and Zhou Tong would die. He had no hesitation about this, no sympathy for the wicked, and certainly no explanation or funeral oration for the wicked. And yet he suddenly realized that he could not walk over. His face had become abnormally pale. At this moment, he was like a child who had not recovered from a long illness. The night wind gently blew through the ruins of the courtyard. Both the sword glows and the sea of blood had already vanished without a trace. Some sort of law and principle faintly appeared in the breeze, blocking his steps. It was a law and principle that he currently could not break through, an existence that surpassed the scope of his current understanding, yet it was something that seemed familiar to him. He gazed into the depths of the darkness, wanting to see something, but ultimately he saw nothing. Then he heard a few things: the light rustling of the night wind, the distant plaintive cries of autumn insects, the sound of the air being torn apart, the thundering of hooves on the street, the exhalation of experts, the sound of battle, and the splashing of blood. The courtyard returned to silence, and then the darkness was torn apart by an even deeper darkness. 10-some assassins of the Department for Purging Officials transformed into 10-some rays of black light and arrived at the scene. They had no time to be shocked by what had just happened, and immediately stood in front of Zhou Tong to protect him. At the same time, several assassins with cold qi rushed at Qin Chongqing. Qin Chongqing knew that it was probably impossible to kill Zhou Tong tonight. This fact caused his hand gripping his sheath to become somewhat cold, as did his body. He paid no attention to those assassins of the Department for Purging Officials, instead continuing to gaze into the depths of the darkness, hoping that his opponent would appear and give a few words of explanation. But the darkness was still the same, so his breathing gradually became coarse. Only those closest to him knew that this meant that he was currently extremely angry. The person hidden in the darkness was probably also keenly aware of this point. The black-clothed assassins of the Department for Purging Officials were like a part of the darkness, noiselessly arriving in front of Qin Chongqing. Without hesitation, they raised their poison metal thorns and thrust them at him. Qin Chongqing's true essence was already exhausted and his internal injuries were acting up. But logically speaking, he should still have the ability to fight. At the very least, he should not have been killed by these assassins. But he did not move. He only gazed into the depths of the darkness, his eyelids drooping, concealing the disappointment and faint sorrow in his eyes. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. Several dozen piercing sounds rang out as many bright streaks of light appeared in the gloomy ruins of the courtyard. These streaks of light were crossbow bolts imbued with divine energy, originating from the divine crossbows of the Orthodoxy cavalry. Those black-clothed assassins groaned again and again as they desperately dodged, but they were still unable to escape the rain of crossbow bolts. They were shot and then transformed into plumes of smoke. Dense and hurried footsteps rang out, followed by the sound of a door being forced open and the sound of old roof tiles being trampled on. 100-some Orthodoxy cavalry from the Li Palace had at some point abandoned their mounts. From the main street, they had leaped over houses and walls. In the shortest amount of time, they had completely surrounded the courtyard, at the same time tightly guarding Qin Chongqing behind them. Just as the Orthodoxy cavalry charged into the office of the Department for Purging Officials, a line of fire suddenly blazed high up in the night sky. Xue Xingchuan had come. His hand gripping his spear, he stood in front of Zhou Tong and the others, his expression cold and stern as he gazed at Qin Chongqing in the midst of the Orthodoxy cavalry. Then he raised his right hand. With his action, the figures of many Imperial Guard soldiers appeared in the darkness behind the ruins of the courtyard. These soldiers wielded crossbows, the tips of the crossbows suffused with a gloomy and terrifying light. There was a deathly stillness as the two sides confronted each other. No one spoke, and no one dared to take the initiative to draw their crossbows. Everyone was staring at Xue Xingchuan's right hand. They knew that his right hand would assuredly fall, but they did not know whether it would fall gently or forcefully. These two actions represented two completely different wills. This also signified that tonight the capital, the future great Zhou dynasty, would enter two completely different situations. Let's end it here. An elderly voice came from the back of the crowd. The crabapple tree in the courtyard had already been reduced to splinters. The house had already been reduced to ruins. Only the remnants of the stone arch leading to the outside world remained. Mao Chuyu and a Taoist nun dressed in a religious robe walked in through the broken stone arch. Xue Xingchuan's eyes narrowed as he recognized the Taoist nun dressed in a religious robe. It was none other than the Li Palace's Archbishop of the Divine Edict and Lin, who was permanently stationed in the south. However, he did not know when she had returned to the capital. Two of the Orthodoxy's 6 prefects had already appeared here. In Mao Chuyu's hand was a magical pestle faintly glowing with light. This was a precious treasure of the Li Palace. Chen Chongqing murdered a minister of the imperial court. Could it be that the Li Palace wants the imperial court to treat this matter as if it never happened? Xue Xingchuan did not turn to look, but he also knew that Zhou Tong's miserable condition was unknown. He said these words not because he was Zhou Tong's only true friend in the world, but because he was a divine general of the great Zhou. He represented the will of the divine empress. Mao Chu walked up to Qin Chongsheng and calmly said, Lord Zhou Tong has murdered so many ministers of the imperial court in these last few years, but the imperial court has always treated it as if it never happened. As the next pope, Principal Qin, what does it matter if he occasionally does something like this? The original title of the chapter was, In the Depths of the Darkness There is a Voice. Because it exceeded the number of words allowed for the title, it was changed to this. Chapter 6, 25. Hearing this, Xue Xingchuan narrowed his eyes even more and tightened his grip on his spear. He was the continent's second-ranked divine general, and his strength was far more formidable than ordinary peak star condensation cultivators, faintly surpassing those at the same level by half a level. Coupled with the fact that he was in the prime of his life, both his spirit and bearing were at their peak. Many people even believed that his strength had already surpassed divine General Han Qing in the Mausoleum of Books. Even if Mao Chuyu and Enlin worked together and had that treasure of the Li Palace, Xue Xingchuan was confident in dealing with them, but could he really keep Qin Chongqing here? Just then, a massive boom suddenly came from the long street that ran parallel to the alley of the Northern Military Department, followed by the stamping of hooves and the collapse of buildings. Dust flew everywhere. The people around the ruins of the courtyard looked over and saw that the buildings along the street had already been destroyed, revealing the scene on the main street. Bright candles burned in lanterns and torches. The dim light of the long street fell upon the armor, but it did not give any warmth. At this end of the street were 18 cardinals of the Li Palace with profound cultivation, as well as several hundred orthodoxy cavalry wielding divine crossbows. At the other end of the street was a dense tide of soldiers of the capital's City Gate Department and the well-equipped Imperial Guard. At the very front was the austere Su Shurji himself. The standoff between the Imperial Court and the Orthodoxy had already lasted an entire night. At the start, both sides had been searching for someone, but now they were at daggers drawn, ready to strike at any moment. In truth, both sides had already struck. The collapsed buildings, the still unsettled dust, the corpses of cavalry lying in pools of blood on the street, the trail of blood at the corner of Su Shurji's lips, and the 3 heavily injured cardinals were all clear proof. The atmosphere on the street was abnormally tense and oppressive. Even the war horses could sense it and uneasily kicked their hooves. The person who ultimately ended this standoff was a person that no one had expected. Zhou Tong, covered in blood and on the verge of death, said, "I'm still alive." Yes, he was still alive. This was something that Chen Chongsheng could not accept, but it was something that both the Orthodoxy and the Imperial Court were willing to accept, because this meant that there was still room for a buffer. Now, Zhou Tong himself had spoken. A carriage drove over from the alley. The curtain was raised, revealing Prince Chen Lu's face. His handsome face was covered in worry, especially after seeing Qin Changxing. "I've come to take him back," Prince Chen Lu said to Xue Xingchuan, his eyes calm and fearless. After a few moments, Xue Xingchuan slowly lowered his right hand and expressionlessly glanced at Qin Changxing, then ordered his subordinate, "Prince Qin Changxing." The hoofbeats rose once more, still like thunder, but not as hair-raising as before. The cavalry of the imperial court and the orthodoxy followed their orders and slowly retreated into the darkness at the two ends of the street. "I've given everyone trouble," Qin Changxing said to Prince, and then Qin Lu helped him onto the carriage. Qin used Qin, Prince Qin he, Qin. The night wind rustled the curtains, allowing him to see the alley of the Northern Military Department and the courtyard that he had never seen from the main street. He saw the Imperial Guards lifting Zhou Tong onto a stretcher. Zhou Tong's eyes were closed. His face was pale, and his body was covered in blood. He looked just like a dead man. Even if the imperial doctors of the Imperial Palace could save him, this renowned treacherous official would have lost half of his body and soul. He would be no different from a cripple. But Qin Changxing still found it impossible to erase the knot on his brow. "Am I being too daring, not caring for the greater good?" he asked Prince Qin Lu. Prince Qin Lu patted him on the shoulder and comfortingly said, "Zhou Tong is naturally not an ordinary official, but to the Empress he will only be used if he is useful. If you really had killed him just now, would the Empress still take revenge for him? Would she have stirred up a war for him and killed the future Pope? Of course not." In truth, he had not even finished his sentence. In his view, if Qin Changxing was the Empress's own son, then his life was naturally more important than Zhou Tong's. Regardless of whether that rumor was true, even if the Empress wanted to kill Qin Changxing, in her heart, Qin Changxing's life was still 1,000 times, 10,000 times more important than Zhou Tong's. Prince Chen Lu's gaze passed through the curtain and fell on Zhou Tong's body. He harshly said, "He's a dog. Only a dead dog is a dog. As long as it's alive, it's still a wolf." Qin Changxing recalled what Zhixiu had said to him in the past and suddenly felt very tired. He said, "I wasn't able to truly kill him tonight, but I don't know if I'll have another chance in the future." He was keenly aware that, at the very least, he would not have another chance to kill Zhou Tong. A person like Zhou Tong is naturally not easy to kill. For you to be able to force him to this state is already very extraordinary. As a member of the imperial clan, Prince Chen Lu could not possibly have any good impressions of Zhou Tong. More than anyone else, he wanted Zhou Tong dead, so he was more grateful than anyone else for what Qin Changxing had done tonight. "I admire you very much," he said to Qin Changxing. Thinking of the turmoil in the capital tonight and the tense situation on the street that could erupt at any moment, his expression also grew solemn. He had appeared on the street earlier and now sat in a carriage with Qin Changxing, escorted away by the orthodoxy cavalry. This was tantamount to formally declaring his position to the entire capital and the divine empress. Qin Changxing did not feel that there was anything about him that was worthy of admiration, because he had still not been able to kill Zhou Tong. In the Orthodox Academy, Zhixiu had once said that after he killed Zhou Tong, he would go to Mount Li to fetch Qi Jian. At the time, he, Tang 36, and the others had all felt that this was an impossible matter. An important figure like Zhou Tong was naturally very difficult to kill, but tonight he had truly almost succeeded, if not for that final smear of darkness blocking his path, if not for a voice coming from the depths of the darkness falling directly into his mind. This was a voice that he was very familiar with, and also a voice that he had not heard in a very long time. At the time, in that courtyard shrouded in darkness, only Qin Changxing and Zhou Tong were present. Qin Changxing had heard that voice, and Zhou Tong had also heard it. At the time, he believed it to be a hallucination that occurred when he was on the verge of death. The darkness was so serene, so cold. He did not want to die because death was an even more serene, even colder abyss. At the moment when he was the closest to death, all his sinister and terrifying shell was completely shattered. What remained was that malicious, petty, and cowardly him. After confirming that the voice was real, he unhesitatingly agreed to that person's conditions. As expected, that smear of darkness protected his life, but he could not feel a shred of warmth from it. On the contrary, he felt even colder. The common people all said that he, Zhou Tong, was a schemer on par with the demon military advisor, Black Robe, but upon hearing that person's voice, he realized that this saying was just a joke. In front of that person in the depths of the darkness, how could he have the right to discuss schemes? How could he be considered cold and emotionless? In that person's eyes, he was probably just a dog that still had some use. But even if he really was a dog, he still had to live. Even if he had to wag his tail and beg the entire world. Even if his eyes shone with sorrow, he still had to live. As he thought of these things, his mind grew increasingly agitated. Zhou Tong could no longer resist the assault of his injuries and fainted. Under the personal escort of Xue Xingchuan and Su Shiji, the heavily injured Zhou Tong was sent to the imperial palace. Only like this, only in this place, could he be assured of his survival. The news that Zhou Tong was heavily injured had probably already spread. In the capital at night, countless people wanted him dead. It was just like the situation Su Li had encountered on his return journey south. As they gazed at Zhou Tong lying on the bed, on the verge of death and in a terrible state, Xue Xingchuan and Su Shiji remained silent for a very long time, not saying a single word. They didn't know what to say. Just how had Qin Changxing done it? The horrifying and miserable wound from the left side of Zhou Tong's face to his ribs was exposed in the lantern light, a ghastly sight to behold. Xue Xingchuan and Su Shiji were both people who believed that they understood Qin Changxing very well, especially the latter. They could never have imagined that Qin Changxing had such a valiant side. The sacred light master of the imperial court had come. The best imperial doctor of the palace had also come, and that old chief eunuch had also come representing the divine empress. Even after the diagnosis and treatment was concluded and it was confirmed that Zhou Tong would probably be able to keep his life, the empress still did not appear. I will first take care of some business. Perhaps Su Shiji had been touched by something, but his complexion was rather unsightly. Just like that, he left the imperial city. Xue Xingchuan did not leave. He carefully cleaned Zhou Tong's wound, then moved a chair over and sat at the front gate of the palace. He closed his eyes, the spear held horizontally in front of his knees. No matter who wanted to kill Zhou Tong, they had to kill him first, because he was Zhou Tong's only friend in the world. In the world, Zhou Tong only had him as a friend. If even he left Zhou Tong, then Zhou Tong would really only be left alone. Everyone knew that Xue Xingchuan was Zhou Tong's only friend. This was also a matter that the people of the world had not been able to understand even after thinking for several decades. Xue Xingchuan was the second-ranked divine general of the continent. Han Qing had guarded the mausoleum for several hundred years, so he was the true leader of the divine generals. Whether it was his strength, his accomplishments in battle, or his achievements in the north, he could bear this reputation without shame. There had even been a saying that he and Wang Po were the two people with the greatest hopes of breaking through that threshold and entering the divine domain. Moreover, he had a rather good reputation. Whether it was in managing his army or his household, he was extremely strict, yet he just happened to be on good terms with the infamous Zhou Tong. In the past, some people had speculated that this might have been because of the divine empress. However, although the other divine generals loyal to the divine empress feared Zhou Tong, they had never taken the initiative to get close to him, not even giving him any good looks. No one knew why this was the case. The medical skills of the imperial palace's imperial doctors were truly brilliant, and the sacred light had also played a rather important role. Even though Zhou Tong had suffered such heavy injuries, it did not take long for him to wake up. Xue Xingchuan stood up and walked back to the edge of the cavern. Looking at the deathly pale Zhou Tong, he said, "Don't be in a rush to speak. Healing your injuries first." Zhou Tong ignored him, his voice weak, as he asked, "Am I very much like a dog right now?" Chapter 6, 26. At this moment, half of his shoulder and arm had been cut off by Chen Chongsheng's blade, and one of his eyes was also blind. If he were to be described as a dog, then he was undoubtedly a stray dog. Xue Xingchuan frowned and said, "Just focus on recovering." Zhou Tong still did not listen to him. He struggled to turn his neck and looked towards the palace gate. He saw that chair and knew that Xue Xingchuan had previously been guarding there. He was silent for a very long time. Then he asked, "Did the Empress come?" The night sky was filled with stars, and the ground outside the palace was sprinkled with starlight, like water, very peaceful. Xue Xingchuan was silent for a while, then said, "You know, the capital is in a tense situation tonight. The Empress has to pay attention to the Li Palace." "Really?" Zhou Tong squinted his eyes like an old dog. The pain from his left eye made him frown, and his voice also began to tremble. Then, did the Empress say anything? This time, Xue Xingchuan was silent for an even longer time. Zhou Tong raised the corner of his lips, revealing an ugly and even somewhat terrifying smile. He looked at him and said, "You see, I really am just like a dog. Even if I'm about to die, my master won't care." Xue Xingchuan looked at him in silence for a while, then said, "When you were little, I told you that you didn't have to live like this." He was clearly heavily injured, but Zhou Tong somehow found the strength to say in a voice full of resentment, "If I didn't live like this, would I be like you?" Xue Xingchuan was silent again. "From the moment I was in the womb, I couldn't compete with you. When you were born, you weighed no less than 8 caddies and me, not even 5 caddies. That's fine, since my family was poor. No matter how I was raised, I was still like this, but any Xue couldn't give birth to a son and wanted to secretly raise one. So she found our family. If it was me, I would also choose a white fatty like you, not a skinny monkey like me." Zhou Tong said, later, "Andy Xue gave birth to another child and decided to pass the family business to her own son. Afraid that you would resent her, she secretly told you this matter before she died. I admit that after that you treated your parents well, and you treated me even better, taking me to school with you and studying together. But did you ever think, why should I pretend to be your study boy and be with you?" Xue Xingchuan replied, "In front of others, there's nothing I can do, but in our own courtyard, I treat you like a brother." Zhou Tong said mockingly, "But that's only when there's no one around. In front of others, I can only see you and Xue he being brothers. Tell me, how do you think I feel?" Xue Xingchuan fell silent, no longer speaking. "I was congenitally deficient in my mother's womb, and even my cultivation talent couldn't compare to yours. If I hadn't later entered the department for purging officials, encountered that old ghost in prison, learned the secret technique of the Great Crimson Gown, and then plagiarized all over the place, how could I have possibly cultivated to my current level? How can I compare to you?" Zhou Tong expressionlessly stared at the ceiling of the palace, continuing, "But there's a problem with the Great Crimson Gown's secret art. Later on, I cultivated too many things, so there's no hope for me to reach that step in this lifetime. Meanwhile, you're walking step by step in that direction. I just don't understand. We're both twins, so why is there such a huge difference in our fortunes? After so many years, when I saw you once more in the capital, I did not expect that you had already entered the department for purging officials. But even if you began to change at that time, it was not too late." "Too late to do what?" "If I don't sell my life for the Empress, if I don't kill for the Empress, I will lose the Empress's favor and I will be killed by those people." "Be at ease, the Empress will give you an explanation," Xue Xingchuan consoled. Yet in the depths of his heart, not even he believed these words. Just then, footsteps came from outside the palace. The one who came was not the divine Empress, but the medical officer delivering the medicine. After a careful examination, The medical officer carefully carried the wooden table containing the medicine to the bed. From the moment the footsteps came, Zhou Tong had been staring at the medical officer. His face was very pale, but his eyes exuded a strange and fierce light. Xue Xingchuan knew what he was thinking, how disappointed and even despairing he was, but he could do nothing to console him. Taking the medicine bowl from the medical officer's hands, he single-handedly propped him up and prepared to feed him the medicine. Zhou Tong gazed at the black medicinal liquid in the bowl, sensing the divine qi and medicinal fragrance contained within. The expression on his face suddenly became rather strange. "What's wrong?" Xue Xingchuan asked. Zhou Tong's voice trembled slightly, inexplicably causing one's heart to palpitate. "I am not at ease." "It's not that bad." Xue Xingchuan knew what he was worried about. Looking at him, he seriously said, "The Empress is not that sort of person. I've done more things for the Empress than all of you combined. I know better than all of you what sort of person the Empress is. In any case, I'm not at ease." Zhou Tong's voice was getting sharper and sharper, and because of his injuries, his breathing was somewhat lacking. It sounded like a broken bellow whooshing. At this moment, he looked like a stubborn child. Because he did not like the bitterness of medicine, he turned his face away and tightly shut his mouth. Even if he was beaten to death, he would not drink this bowl of medicine. Xue Xingchuan looked at him in his arms and thought about how, many years ago in the old estate, he had also refused to drink medicine just like this. He couldn't help but reveal a smile of reminiscence. Once these matters in the capital were finished, he would have someone send him back to the old estate to retire. He believed that besides the Empress himself and Xue He, no one else would know where he was. As Xue Xingchuan thought about these things, he raised the bowl of medicine and drank a mouthful. "Look, this medicine is fine and it's not bitter." Many years ago, when he coaxed Zhou Tong into drinking medicine, he had done this. He would first drink a mouthful for him. Zhou Tong looked at this scene and suddenly began to cry, sobs coming from his throat. Xue Xingchuan was also somewhat moved. After Zhou Tong finished crying, his mind was even more exhausted, but he was much more relaxed. He looked at Xue Xingchuan and forced a smile. "I've thought it through. It's fine as long as I'm alive." Xue Xingchuan was very comforted. "It's fine as long as you've thought it through." When the carriage returned to the Orthodox Academy, it was already surrounded. The armies of the imperial court and the cavalry of the Orthodoxy stretched from the main street to 100 Flowers Lane, and then to the perimeter of the academy walls. Chen Changxing got off the carriage and bid farewell to Prince Qinlu. Under countless gazes, he walked into the Orthodox Academy. The gate of the Orthodox Academy was pushed open, revealing the brightly lit interior. Although it was already late at night, not a single one of the several hundred teachers and students slept, because tonight no one could sleep. The sword array, formed by the female disciples of South Stream Temple, had already been moved from the base of the small building to the back of the academy gate. Sensing the awe-inspiring sword intent, one could be sure that if the soldiers of the imperial court wanted to force their way in, they would have to pay an extremely heavy price. But for some reason, the faces of these female disciples did not have their usual calm and confidence. Instead, there was some worry. "Where did you go?" Tang, 36, asked him. The teachers and students of the Orthodox Academy were also looking at him. Chen Changxing had left the Orthodox Academy 4 hours ago. He had gone to the bottom of New North Bridge, to the Plum Garden Inn, and finally to the alley of the Northern Military Department, doing many things. Because of his departure, the situation in the capital had suddenly become tense. The Orthodoxy cavalry and the Imperial Guard had arrived one after the other. The people of the Orthodox Academy naturally knew that something had happened, but they did not know what it was. The battle in the alley of the Northern Military Department had just concluded. Tang 36 had people in the capital, but the news did not travel any faster than Chen Changxing's return. "It's fine. Everyone go to sleep." Chen Changsheng indicated that Su-mo you should lead the teachers and students to rest, and then he brought Tang 36 and Jishio to the small building. The sword array of South Stream Temple naturally moved with him. In a short while they had arrived by the lake. Su-mo you had also hurried back. Are you really fine? Tang 36 looked into his eyes and very seriously asked. They knew of Chen Changsheng's current condition and could not tease him as they usually did. They had originally believed that after Chen Changsheng left the Orthodox Academy, he would not return. Who could have expected that he would return so late at night? This made them feel much more at ease, but it was impossible for them to completely relax. I'm really fine, Chen Changsheng said. I just went out to take care of a few things. What things? I went to kill Zhou Tong. Hearing this, the area in front of the small building instantly became incomparably quiet. The night wind lightly brushed against the great banyan tree, but could not ruffle its leaves. It lightly brushed against the surface of the lake, but no ripples could be seen. Everyone was shocked, especially the girls of South Stream Temple. The mood in the capital tonight was abnormal, as if a storm was brewing. Jeshio and the others had guessed that it had something to do with him, but they had not expected that he had gone to take care of such an important matter. There were countless people in this world that wanted Zhou Tong dead, but how many of them dared to put these thoughts into practice? Su-mo looked at him, his face brimming with admiration. The girls of South Stream Temple looked at him, their eyes suddenly brightening, thinking, no wonder he is the man the temple master likes, truly extraordinary. I said before, Zhou Tong is someone I want to kill. Jishio looked at him and said, seeing how special your current situation is, I don't blame you. Chen Changsheng looked back at him and said, back then, you were imprisoned in Zhou prison because of my relationship with the Orthodox Academy, so I always wanted to finish this matter before leaving. Leave? Go where? Upon hearing this, the girls of South Stream Temple were rather confused and doubtful. Tang 36 and Su-mo understood the meaning of the word leave, and the slightly excited mood they had just felt instantly chilled. I said before, just add more money, Jishio said. Chen Changsheng did not argue with him over this matter, saying, my apologies, I was not able to kill him. A voice rose from among the girls of South Stream Temple. Daring to kill him is very impressive. The speaker was Yi Xiaolian, once a worshipper of Qiu Shanjun, later a worshipper of Chen Changsheng, and now a worshipper of Su Yurong. Tonight, she suddenly felt that liking Chen Changsheng was a very reasonable matter. Chen Changsheng noticed that the mood of the girls of South Stream Temple was somewhat strange, and asked, what happened? Yi Xiaolian uneasily said, the temple master still hasn't returned. Chen Changsheng thought this over, then asked, perhaps she's staying the night in the imperial palace? Yi Xiaolian shook her head and said, the temple master said that she would definitely return at nightfall. If she doesn't return, hearing this, Chen Changsheng, Tang 36, and the others finally realized that there was a problem, and their expressions turned grave. Chapter 6, 27. The Holy Maiden said that if she cannot return, we will have to trouble little Principal Chen to temporarily lead us. The girls of South Stream Temple solemnly bowed to Chen Changsheng, their white dresses fluttering in the wind. Don't worry, the Divine Empress treats her as her own daughter. Out of respect for you, His Holiness will not do anything to her. After returning to the house, Tang 36 explained to Chen Changsheng. Chen Changsheng knew that this was true, but why had Yurong given such an order to the girls of South Stream Temple before going to the imperial palace? Did she know that it would be very difficult for him to leave the imperial palace? Why? What did she want to do in the imperial palace? Was she still in the imperial palace? He unsheathed his sword and threw a set of flexible armor in front of Tang 36. Remember to help me deliver this to Scholatry Manor and give it to Wang. Pah. The flexible armor was covered in blood, some deep and some shallow, and there was also an extremely thin sword hole. only the tie had been cut, so it should be very easy to repair. Su Mou and Jishio did not know what sort of flexible armor this was, but Chan Chongsheng had specifically ordered it to be delivered to Scholatry Manor for Wang Pa. The Tang clan was the wealthiest in the world, so Tang 36's insight was naturally extraordinary. Hearing the words Scholatry Manor and Wang Pa, he very quickly guessed what it was. This is the 6 Protections divine armor. He picked up the flexible armor from the ground and asked Qin Chongxing in shock. Su Mou and Jeshio were also dumbfounded. Yes, this was originally the Wang clan's. It just so happens to be returned to Wang Pa. He should be very happy. Chan Chongxing then took out a bronze mirror and handed it over. I don't know what this is, but it should also be a good item. If my guess is correct, it should be able to restrain the orthodoxy's light energy. This bronze mirror had probably been prepared by Zhou Tong to deal with the orthodoxy's divine staff. It had not been of much use in the previous battle, but the fact that it had remained intact under the Having Blade made him feel rather interested. Tang 36 took the bronze mirror and gasped, "The mirror of pure virtue?" Chen Chongxing only knew that the Li Palace had a hall of pure virtue, but he did not know that there was a mirror with the same name. Jishio arched his brows. Su Mou could no longer hold back. He walked up to Tang 36, took the mirror, and carefully used his sleeve to wipe away the blood. "Is this bronze mirror very famous?" Qin Chongxing asked. "You never look at the tier of legendary weapons." Tang 36 countered. "Its position on the tier is even higher than your stainless sword." Qin Chongsheng was startled. He thought to himself that when he chopped down with his kitchen knife, he didn't see anything special about this bronze mirror. What exactly did you go to do? Kill Zhou Tong or rob him? Tang 36 carried the 6 Protections divine armor and walked in front of him. He was speechless. How could you have gone out for such a short time and brought back 2 weapons from the tier of legendary weapons? Qin Chongsheng said, "These are all Zhou Tong's belongings. When I killed him, I conveniently took them back." After a moment of silence, Jishio and the other 2 looked at each other. When they found out that Chen Chongsheng had gone to kill Zhou Tong, they were very shocked, but they did not ask for too many details. This was because they had never imagined that Chen Chongsheng would actually be able to accomplish such a task. Moreover, Chen Chongsheng had later admitted his failure, but if he really was no match for Zhou Tong and had relied on the protection of the powerful figures of the orthodoxy to return, then how could he have obtained these 2 treasures from Zhou Tong? They turned to Qin Chongsheng, waiting for his explanation. Qin Chongsheng recounted what had happened in the courtyard in the alley of the Northern Military Department, but he still did not go into too much detail. "You actually won." Tang 36 looked at him like he was looking at a monster. Qin Chongsheng replied, "Since it was a battle to the death, victory and defeat are meaningless." Tang 36 said in shock, "But in the end you still won." Chen Chongsheng paid him no more attention, saying, "See what you want to do with this bronze mirror. If it's not easy to divide, then it can be left in the Orthodox Academy to be used as Academy property." Tang 36 was displeased by these words. Last words are things that only need to be said once. Do you really have to constantly remind us that you're a person about to die? Qin Chongsheng thought it over, then replied, "These are not last words, but the matter of inheritance." In the view of many people, the palace hall in the deepest part of the Li Palace did not suit the Pope's status. This was because there were too many flying eaves outside the palace hall, cutting the sky into the shape of a well. Perhaps this was the origin of the word courtyard. But there was also an advantage. If one stood in the courtyard and looked up, they would often be able to see the neatly cut starry sky, a very beautiful sight to behold. The night gradually deepened. The darkness also gradually deepened. It was even like an invisible cloud obscuring the stars in the night sky. The chilly winds of the early autumn could not disperse it no matter what. A voice arose from the depths of the darkness. This voice was very calm and indifferent, tinged with nostalgia and the vicissitudes of time. Yet it also gave off the feeling that this nostalgia and vicissitudes was something that he intentionally wanted others to hear. It's been almost 20 years since I've seen the night sky here. Just like many people in the capital tonight, the Pope had not gone to sleep. He had just finished watering the green leaf potted plants and was using a silk handkerchief to carefully wipe the water droplets off the leaves. When he heard the voice coming from the darkness outside the hall, he stopped what he was doing and slowly turned around. If you had not been too impatient back then, perhaps the story of these 20 years would not have occurred. The Pope said to the depths of the darkness. The person in the darkness replied, "Perhaps it's just that I didn't expect that you would ultimately still stand on her side." Hearing these words, the wrinkles on the Pope's face seemed to deepen. He slowly said, "It's all in the past." The voice in the darkness said, "Yes, it's all in the past. What we should be talking about is the present, the matter of tonight." The Pope placed the silk handkerchief by the green leaf potted plant and walked to the stone steps outside the hall. Gazing into the darkness, he said, "Even now, I am still not very clear on just what you want to do." The chilly night wind blew against his hemp robes, making them seem as if they were about to leave the world. The voice in the darkness sank, as hard and indestructible as metal or stone. "You have always been well aware of what I want to do, but back then, you did not agree with my view. Now that 20 years have passed, you know that your judgment back then was wrong, so you must stand at my side." After hearing these words, the Pope lowered his head to look at the shadow on the stone steps, sinking into a long silence. Tion Hai possesses the best bloodline and talent, possesses the best position, but she is a woman. Her vision is limited, and there is a problem with her personality. The past 200-some years of history have long since proved this point. If she continues to sit on the imperial throne of the great Zhou, even if the confluence of the north and south proceeds smoothly, the human race will still not be able to defeat the demons under her leadership. The wind rustled the green trees outside the hall, the green leaves within the hall, and the light spilling out from the majestic and imposing great hall of light behind them. All of this seemed to waver. This was because the person in the darkness spoke once more, his voice even colder and more certain. "Do you want the entire country to be exterminated? Do you really want to see the descendants of the Chen imperial clans bloodline destitute and destitute, wither day by day until their lineage is severed? When we parted in the Orthodox Academy, we had already agreed that I would be responsible for continuing the imperial clan's bloodline while you would stay in the capital and watch over her for a while longer. 20 years have passed just like that. Could it be that you've already forgotten your original thoughts and are intoxicated by the arrangement of two saints sharing the same sky with her? No, in Xining Village, I used my indifferent eyes to look at you for more than 10 years. I will not allow you to continue degenerating like this. Now is the time to lay my cards on the table. I will not allow you to continue guarding this uninhabited palace. If you cover your eyes, you will pretend that you do not see all these messy matters in this world." The Pope lowered his head to look at the faint shadow left behind by the eaves on the stone steps and fell silent for a very long time. After some time, he raised his head to the depths of the darkness and asked, "Just where does your confidence come from?" The person in the darkness replied, "No one can resist that sort of temptation. The ripe fruit is just on the branch, waiting for her to pluck it." The Pope replied, "That child once said to me that only a saint can resist it, but she has always been a saint. The so-called saints of the current world are just a joke. How could a greedy and shameless woman like her truly comprehend the principles of the divine? If she truly believed that eating that fruit would allow her to defy the heavens and change her fate to perfection, allowing her to enter the great realm above the concealed divinity, do you think she would be able to endure it? Do you know that night when he was 10 years old, when the fragrance filled the air, how much pain I endured? If that greedy and foolish golden dragon had not once again braved the danger of falling cultivation to descend, and I had gone into the cloud grave to fight it, I might have eaten him back then. The voice of the person in the darkness became cold and cruel, let alone the fact that, in her view, this was something she had to do in order to defy the heavens and change her fate, the most merciless request of the heavenly Tao. The fruit that fell from her body was ultimately eaten by her. How could there be a more perfect cycle of the heavenly Tao? I could not see it, so how could she see it? The Pope's voice became somewhat tired, carrying with it a guilt that could not be easily released. In the end, you still succeeded in deceiving me, and also deceiving Melisha. Back then, in your letter, you did not say who needed to be sacrificed in this matter, much less that the person to be sacrificed was him. When a fruit is ripe, it has to be eaten by someone, whether it's poisonous or not. At the beginning, I believed that by allowing the fruit to ripen as quickly as possible, it could be planted into the fertile soil as quickly as possible, helping it grow into a towering tree. When the fruit is ripe, if it is not eaten by someone, it will eventually rot. In any case, that child will die. What problem is there in using his inevitable death to exchange for such a great benefit for all of humanity? But that child himself does not know all this. Everyone has their own things that they want to do, but not everyone can make decisions for their own fate, have the right to choose. Could it be that only you have the right to choose? Because I can provide you and this world with the best choice. Do you know what sort of choice I and this world need? Melisha wholeheartedly wants the imperial clan to return to its position, while you only care about the continuation of the human race. He is the son of Tianhai and Emperor Xian, so no one will oppose him. Moreover, please believe me, he is the continent's most intelligent and most extraordinary youth. He is the most suitable successor to the great Zhou imperial throne, and also the most suitable future leader of humanity. But that child is also your disciple. The voice in the darkness disappeared for a very long time, and then it spoke up once more. But first and foremost, he is a member of the imperial clan. From the first moment he existed in this world, he had to bear the responsibility for the continuation of the imperial clan, to bleed for the imperial clan. Chapter 6:28. The Pope gazed into the depths of the darkness and said, "This is sending him to his death." The person in the darkness indifferently replied, "What does death count for? So many members of the imperial clan died back then." The Pope was quiet for a very long time, the sea of stars in the depths of his eyes gradually growing calm. "You are not a member of the imperial clan, so why have you never been able to let go of these matters?" The voice in the darkness was calm and firm. "This is His Majesty's final decree." The Pope knew that the His Majesty he spoke of was naturally not Emperor Xian, but that most extraordinary sovereign since ancient times, Emperor Taizong. This conversation had begun many years ago with a letter sent from Xining village to the capital. This debate had begun 2.5 years ago, when that youth called Chan Chongxing walked into the abandoned campus of the Orthodox Academy. It seemed that this conversation should end tonight, but even now the Pope still had not made up his mind. Just like the green leaf in the pot, it gently swayed in the wind. This did not mean that he did not have his own standpoint, that his Tao heart was not firm enough. On the contrary, it was precisely because he had to consider too many things, far and wide and meticulous, that he found it very difficult to make a decision. Other than me, no one knows that you are most skilled in the scroll of time, the canon of flowing west. In the darkness, a gaze seemed to fall on the small pool in the hall, and then on the wooden ladle by the pool. The person said to the Pope, "You are the gurgling, clear water flowing west. Although you have been flowing for 1,000 years, you are still unstained by a speck of dust or filth, so clear that the bottom can be seen, so calm and gentle, yet filled with an inexhaustible divine power. Then you do not need to make a decision now. At the final moment, you will ultimately discover what your heart is." After saying this, There was no more sound in the darkness. The Pope stood on the stone steps, gazing at the shadows cast by the eaves, standing in front of the sound of flowing water, the green leaf slightly swaying in the wind. Senior brother, you cultivate the Tao of following your heart, so you are so confident that my heart will follow yours. After leaving Xining village, Yuren followed his master to many places, but whether it was the snowy plains of Mount Han or the wilderness beneath Snowhold Pass, he did not like them very much. There were too few people, and White Emperor City on the shore of the Red River did not leave a very deep impression on him. Only when he heard that the demi-human princess was his junior brother's student did he feel somewhat happy. He had been in a good mood these past few days, not because this was the capital, his hometown. He had been raised by his master since he was a child. He only had some vague memories of his childhood, but he could no longer remember them clearly. His master had told him that he was from the capital and had lived here before, but he could not remember where his home was. Furthermore, he did not like the capital. The reason he did not like the snowy plains and wilderness was that there were too many people in the capital. There were too many people in the capital and too few in the snowy plains. It would be best if Xining village had an equal number of people. He did not know why his master had brought him to so many places, or why they had come to the capital. He was only worried about his junior brother's health and wanted to meet with him. However, after his master had brought him to the Mausoleum of Books, he had quietly disappeared. He had also instructed him not to leave the Mausoleum of Books, saying that in a few days he would naturally be able to meet with his junior brother. Seeing his master's disappearing figure, he thought about it and felt that this was also good. No matter what his junior brother encountered, his master would always be able to resolve it. Moreover, there were truly too many people in the capital, and he really did not like it. The people in the Mausoleum of Books were neither too many nor too few. There were green trees and flowing water, and it was very easy for him to think of the mountain behind Xining village and that stream, as well as the happy days he and his junior brother spent together memorizing the Taoist canon and catching fish to eat. He had heard that when his junior brother had viewed the monoliths and comprehended the Tao, he had drawn down a sky full of starlight. This made him very proud and happy, and so he felt that he had even more reasons to like this place. There was also another very important matter. In the Mausoleum of Books, one could view the heavenly tome monoliths. He had studied the Taoist canon since he was a child, and other than the last of the 3,000 scrolls of the Great Tao, he had long since mastered them. Although he was the same as Chen Chongsheng and his master had not taught him how to cultivate, he naturally felt a sense of closeness towards the heavenly tome monoliths that hid the truths of the Tao. He wanted to see some interesting things from them. When his master had left the Mausoleum of Books, he had told him not to leave, but he had not said that he could not view the heavenly tome monoliths. He prepared 2 days' worth of food in that small courtyard, and then leaned on his cane as he stood by the fence and watched the sunlight change twice. Feeling that there should not be any problems, he took his packed lunchbox and left the plum garden, following the mountain path towards the mausoleum. There was still a long period of time before the grand examination. Because of last year's opening of the Garden of Zhou and the Boiling Stone Summit, as well as the many unforeseen events that had occurred afterwards, the monolith viewers of the Mausoleum of Books had left the mausoleum one after another. The number of cultivators remaining in the mausoleum was much fewer than in previous years. He walked on the mountain path for a very long time, but did not encounter a single person until he arrived in front of the first monolith hut. In front of this monolith hut, he encountered a monolith guardian called Jijin. That monolith guardian had a very gentle temperament, and he had an indifference and ease that seemed to have seen through the affairs of the world. He gave Yuren a very good impression. He thought to himself, the Mausoleum of Books truly is a holy land for cultivation. After viewing the monoliths for a long time, could it be that one's temperament would undergo such a transformation? The monolith guardian called Jijin asked him which sect he was a disciple of, and why he had entered the Mausoleum of Books at this time to view the monoliths. Yuren did not know how to answer. Fortunately, He had never been able to speak. He placed his cane on the pillar of the pavilion and used one hand to make a few gestures, but he did not know if the monolith guardian would be able to understand. Ji-Jin could not understand his sign language, but he could clearly see Yu-Ren's handicap. He felt sympathy and did not ask any more questions. He even reminded Yu-Ren not to force himself when viewing the monoliths and to pay attention to rest. As he watched the monolith guardian depart along the mountain path, Yu-Ren wiped the cold sweat from his forehead. A smug smile appeared in his eyes as he thought to himself, "My junior brother is wrong. How could I not deceive people? It's just that, in Xining Village, I don't need to deceive people. Look, I've succeeded in deceiving a senior." The first heavenly tome monolith of the Mausoleum of Books was the reflecting monolith. Yu-Ren slowly dragged his legs over to the monolith and gazed at it. He was somewhat curious, somewhat excited, and even could not help but extend his hand to touch it. He felt that this heavenly tome monolith was truly very interesting. That poem written by a virtuous predecessor was truly wonderful. His fingers felt very comfortable, ice cold, just like that small stream on the mountain behind Xining Village. Then he arrived in front of the second heavenly tome monolith. This heavenly tome monolith was also very interesting. He looked at it with great interest, feeling that those lines were very beautiful, just like the rays of light cut by the leaves on the mountain behind Xining Village in autumn. Then he arrived in front of the third heavenly tome monolith. This heavenly tome monolith was even more interesting. The marks on the monolith were still clear, the lines still beautiful, but they were not as complicated as the first two monoliths. In his eyes, they had become extremely simple lines. Simple did not mean that they were not beautiful, nor did it mean that they were easy to understand. It was just like when it rained in Xining Village, the lines of water that slid down the eaves of the old temple, as well as the traces left behind by the yellow leaves that had been knocked down by the rain. In order to understand the pattern in those traces, Yu-Ren spent quite a bit of time this time. He even put his cane to the side and sat on the ground to think for a while. And then the fourth heavenly tome monolith, the fifth heavenly tome monolith, the sixth, the seventh. After some time had passed, Yu-Ren arrived in front of a monolith hut. Leaning on his cane, he slightly tilted his head and looked at the monolith under the hut. He felt that it was rather strange, because that monolith was broken. He did not know where the original monolith had gone. He did not know that this broken monolith had been cut down by a person called Zhou Dufu. With this broken monolith as the boundary, he had seen those heavenly tome monoliths. They were all called the monoliths of the front mausoleum. He knew that his junior brother had very smoothly viewed the monoliths in the Mausoleum of Books last year, making him very proud. But he did not know about the saying of viewing all the monoliths of the front mausoleum in one day. He raised his head to look at the sky and realized that the sun had not yet reached its zenith. The weather could not be considered too hot, so he decided to continue viewing. It had not even been half a day since he had entered the Mausoleum of Books. How to view the broken monolith, he also did not know. He slowly walked in front of the broken monolith and stretched out his hand to touch the broken stubble on the monolith. After a while, he withdrew his finger and thoughtfully looked around. He realized that he was still in front of the broken monolith. He switched sides of his cane and used his broken arm to hold it. He used his free right hand to scratch his itchy back. He was somewhat confused and thought to himself, "How should I go next?" The autumn wind in the mountain mausoleum gently blew, lifting up the Taoist robe that had been washed white and lifting up the black hair on his forehead, revealing his eye. He had one eye that could not see, but he did not know if he could see anything else. He walked to the forest behind the monolith hut and used his hand to push aside the thorny branches of grass. He curiously looked inside. He could faintly make out a path there. It had probably been trampled out, but it was almost covered in weeds. No one knew how many years it had been since anyone had walked on it. Seeing that it was difficult to stand on the small path, Yu-Ren's face revealed an awkward expression. However, after thinking it over, he still used his cane and hobbled inside. The weeds gradually drowned out his figure, and the desolate path gradually extended under his feet and the cane. After some time, he finally walked out of the forest and arrived in front of another monolith hut. He raised his arm and used his sleeve to wipe the sweat off his face. He felt his face heat up and thought to himself that it was fortunate that he had not gotten lost, or else it would have been troublesome and he would not have been able to call for help. He walked to the monolith hut and began to view the monoliths. This was no longer the front mausoleum. Of the 13 mausoleums of heavenly books, he had already arrived at the second mausoleum. After Zhou Dufu had broken the monolith in the mausoleum of books, he was the first person to directly walk to this place. Of course, he did not know any of this. He continued to view the monoliths, continued to advance, looking at monolith after monolith. When he felt hungry, he would take out a lunchbox from his bosom and eat. When he was hungry, he would find some mountain water to drink. The food in the lunchbox was very simple: green peppers stir-fried with cured meat. He had found the cured meat on the beam of the kitchen in some abandoned courtyard. He had picked the green peppers from an untended vegetable field. The sun set and the stars rose into the night sky. The sun rose and the stars retreated behind the light. The clear streams in the mountains slowly flowed, just like time. After some time, Yuren realized that his lunchbox was empty. Whether it was the green peppers stir-fried with cured meat or the fermented bean curd, there was nothing left. He was truly rather hungry, so he retraced his steps. As he walked past those monolith huts, he finally saw a few cultivators. In the last few days, he had only seen the silent forest and monoliths. Now that he could finally see people, Yuren was rather happy and nodded to those cultivators in greeting. But those cultivators looked at him like he was a ghost. Who was this person? Why had they never seen him before? Why had he come back from the front? Had he already seen the next heavenly tome monolith?